Chapter 5:16. Zhang Yan followed the boy into the hall. He saw the sect leader sitting on the jade platform. Behind him the black water was surging. There was a loud rumbling sound. He did not dare to be rude. Immediately he bowed and said, "Disciple Zhang Yan, specially come to return the Yingjie fish drum." He flicked his sleeves and the treasure flew out. It turned into a green light and flew out. Sect leader Qin swept it up from the heavenly river and the item disappeared without a trace. Sect leader Qin had a gentle expression and said, "Zhang Yan, you have been away for 30 years and you have already stepped into the Yuaning realm. You have not disappointed me." Zhang Yan bowed slightly and said, "Sect leader, please tell me what my next step should be?" Sect leader Qin smiled and said, "Oh, you have already guessed it?" A bright light flashed in Zhang Yan's eyes and he said, "Everything sect leader does has a deep meaning. I am just guessing in my heart." From sect leader Qin's actions, he could tell that this person was really far-sighted and wouldn't do things for no reason. He used the Yingjie fish drum as an example. He had only used it once, and just by looking at how weak his true spirit was, he knew that his essence energy had been damaged. Before this, only Qi Yuntian had used it before. Why would he pay such a price just to help him enter the nascent soul stage? There had to be another reason. In the recent decades, the sect leader had arranged everything and most of the tour guide's efforts were on him. How would he let him be useless at such a crucial moment? Although Zhang Yan couldn't see what the sect leader would do, as long as he knew this, he wouldn't have to worry about not being able to unsheath his sharp sword. The battle with Elder Hu was just to prove his strength. As for heavily injuring him, he didn't care at all. If the sect leader wasn't willing to support him, then even if he could beat Hua, Zhong, and Luo in the competition next year, it would be useless. On the contrary, these were just small matters and there was no need to worry about them. Not long ago, the decree that was sent out from the floating heaven palace confirmed his guesses. 5 years of seclusion was actually a hint. 5 years later, it would be the grand competition of the 16 sects. If one truly wanted to cut off his path to the grand competition, then he could be punished with 10 years, 20 years, or even 30 years. However, Shi Ri's prediction was so accurate that he could confirm that his previous judgment was correct. And all of this, the sect leader had never said it out loud, it was all up to him. Sect leader Qin cast his gaze over and sighed. "I know what you're thinking. However, if you were to go to the Dharma assembly, you would have to cast aside your identity as a member of the Qinsong school. I would have nothing to offer you, and you would not be taken care of by your peers." At that time, be it the Shen men or the devil sects, they would all be your enemies. Even so, do you still dare to go? Zhang Yan's gaze was resolute as he smiled and said, "Even if I am surrounded by enemies, I dare to face them with my sword." A bright light appeared in sect leader Qin's eyes. He looked at him for a moment, then raised his voice and shouted, "Zhang Yan, from today onwards, that disciple of yours, Wei Zihong, will be the sect leader of the Yaoyin sect. You will be the grand supreme elder of the Yaoyin sect. You will lead the sect to the sword competition assembly." Zhang Yan's body trembled slightly. When these words were spoken, it was as if the clouds had parted to reveal the sun. His mind was suddenly enlightened, and he understood everything. So all the schemes from before were for this purpose. The sect leader did not intend to break through the predicament for him from within the sect, but to start from scratch. In just an instant, these thoughts flashed through Zhang Yan's mind. He calmed himself down, stepped forward, and bowed. He said loudly, "Yes, sect leader." Sect leader Qin said, "If you have any doubts, feel free to ask." Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, "Sect leader, can the Yaoyin sect also fight for that item? Will it not be tolerated by the other sects?" Sect leader Qin smiled and shook his head. "Even if the other sects are lucky enough to obtain that item, they will still be hunted down by the 10 sects of Shenmen. However, the Yaoyin sect is not included in this list. Back when Yijioyang was in charge of this sect, he signed a spell book with the heads of the other sects, agreeing to have a sword competition and discuss the ownership of that item. However, ever since he went into seclusion, he did not show up even once. As time passed, the sects have forgotten about it. However, the 10,000 years have not passed, and the name of this sect is still on that spell book, and has not disappeared. Even if the Yaoyin sect still has one disciple, the sects will still have to acknowledge it. Therefore, this time, it can be considered to be justifiable. Zhang Yan suddenly understood. No wonder the sect leader wanted to obtain the inheritance of the Yaoyin sect and wanted him to take Wei Zihong as his disciple. So he had already made arrangements for this. He thought about it carefully, and secretly praised sect leader Qin's method could be said to be brilliant. He and Huoxian entered one in the open and one in the dark. Both sides attacked at the same time, and even before the sword competition, they had already gained an advantage. Moreover, according to common sense, a sect like the Yaoyin sect that had not appeared in the world for thousands of years, even if they went to the sword competition, they would at most send one disciple. Perhaps it would cause some surprise, but it would not cause the disciples of the other sects to feel fear. In the sword competition between the 16 sects, the sects had always decided the number of disciples who would enter the next competition based on the result of the sword competition. The top number would be 3, and the bottom number would be 1. If Zhang Yan did not have the support of the sect leader, if he wanted to go to the sword competition, he would have to think of a way to squeeze out one disciple. As the 6 great demon sects had been suppressed by the Shen men for thousands of years, they had lost every time. Therefore, this time, they could only send one disciple. As for the other Shen men sects, they could send at least 2 disciples. They definitely would not put a weak sect like the Yaoyin sect, which had suddenly appeared, in their eyes. Sect leader Qin said unhurriedly, "Zhang Yan, going to the spell competition this time will depend on your own ability. Whatever you get, it is up to you. There is no need to ask me." Zhang Yan's heart moved. Ever since Zhou Changju returned, he also knew that the item was related to the fate of the Shenmen. Whichever sect obtained it would be able to strengthen the sect. Even if it was the first place in the competition, it would be impossible for one sect to swallow it. This time, because it also involved the battle between the Shenmen and the demon sects, the 10 great Shenmen sect leaders had already agreed on how to divide the item. Since the sect leader had given such an order, it seemed that he was not willing to be bound by this, so he used him as a hidden chess piece. However, with this promise, didn't it mean that as long as he snatched the item back, he could take it all for himself? He shook his head slightly. Right now, it was too early to think about this. He only said, "This disciple understands." Sect leader Qin raised his hand and sent over a talisman. He said, "After you leave the palace, there is no hurry to return to the residence. Take this talisman and make a trip to the Fangchen courtyard." Zhang Yan did not ask for the reason. He extended his hand and received it. Seeing that there was no longer any sound from the jade platform, he knew that it was time for him to leave. He bowed deeply, turned around, and walked out. The children on both sides bowed to him. After Zhang Yan left the floating sky palace, he looked back. From the moment he walked out of this place, he could be considered to be completely on the side of the sect leader. There was no other way for him to go. He smiled slightly. But this was also good. Being valued by the sect leader was better than relying on the heavenly paradise true form to enter the sect. With a clear whistle, he did not use a talisman. Just like that, he broke through the astral wind, turned into a rainbow, and left the floating sky palace. He shot out a sword light, breaking the wind and splitting the air. Looking east, he arrived in the sky above the Fangchen courtyard in a moment. In front of him, there were 2 floating peaks facing each other in the sky. They were connected by chains. There were strange rocks, waterfalls, and celestial cranes flying in the sky. There were restrictions on the outside. This courtyard was one of the 9 courtyards of the Qinsong school. The formation in the school and the restrictions on the islands were all set up by the cultivators of this courtyard. Originally, this place was controlled by the aristocratic families. When he left the mountain last time, he heard that the aristocratic families had taken it back. Zhang Yan did not know why sect leader Qin had sent him here. But since it was a deliberate arrangement, there must be a deeper meaning behind it. He rode on the sword for a few more miles. Suddenly, the scenery in front of him changed. The wind blew in the sky, and countless yellow talisman appeared in front of him. A cloud ladder led straight to the middle of the 2 mountains. On the cloud ladder, There was a Taoist wearing a yellow robe with dashing eyes and sharp eyebrows sitting there. He seemed to be meditating with his eyes closed. As if he sensed someone approaching, the Taoist suddenly opened his eyes and looked over. He shouted, "Who is here? Stop quickly. If you go any further, you will reach the forbidden area of the Fangchen courtyard. Without the permission of the sect leader, you are not allowed to enter." As he spoke, he moved his hand, and the yellow talismans trembled together, making a thunderous sound. Zhang Yan stopped the sword light and stopped moving. He looked at the Taoist. The young Taoist's cultivation base was at the third stage of the core transformation realm, but he had never seen him before. This was not surprising. There were many disciples in the Qinsong school, and his cave abode was outside the mountain. Other than a few elders, he did not know many people. He said, "I am Zhang Yan. I am here on the orders of the sect leader." The young Taoist was shocked. He quickly put away his arrogant aura and said cautiously, "So Zhenjin Zhang is here." He waved his sleeve, and the yellow talismans in the sky disappeared in an instant. He leaped over and looked at Zhang Yan from head to toe. He said politely, "Do you have a talisman token, Zhenjin?" Ever since he killed Elder who with one sword strike, Zhang Yan's reputation in the sect had spread far and wide. No one dared to look down on him. Moreover, this Taoist was not as good as Zhang Yan in terms of cultivation base and status. Zhang Yan took out the talisman and handed it over. The Taoist did not relax because of his status. He took a few steps back and looked at it seriously before handing it back respectfully. He stepped aside to make way for the cloud ladder and said apologetically, "Sorry for the offense. Zhenjin, please go ahead." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "May I know how to address you, Taoist?" The Taoist smiled and returned the greeting. He said, "I dare not. I am Yu Chongyang, a deacon of the Fangchen courtyard." Zhang Yan looked at him in surprise. He nodded and said, "It's an honor to meet you." Yu Chongyang and Huang Fuzhou were once known as Qinsong's twin talents. Both of them were disciples of the same master and disciple. However, like Zhang Yan, they were not disciples of the Grotto Heaven Zhenjin. Huang Fuzhou had always wanted to become one of the top 10 disciples and was well known by the disciples in the sect. However, he had been cultivating in the sect for many years and did not show himself. It was very difficult to find him. Zhang Yan had heard that he had once chosen a master for a divine item. His skills were extraordinary, and now it seemed that he was indeed extraordinary. After Zhang Yan bid farewell to the Taoist, he used his escape technique and crossed the cloud ladder. He saw a Taoist temple in the mountain and went there. He landed on the empty space in front of the temple, startling two red-crowned cranes. They flapped their wings and flew to the temple. In front of the temple, a Taoist boy was leaning against a bronze pillar that was as thick as his waist. He was snoring softly. At first, he did not notice the arrival of someone. It was only when the crane cried a few times that he woke up drowsily. Suddenly seeing Zhang Yan standing in front of him, he was startled and cried out in alarm. He subconsciously pulled on the rope beside him. In the valley, the bell rang loudly. One by one, the bronze pillars were pulled up from the ground. Chapter 517. There was a total of 1 copper pillar, and it immediately triggered the qi of the earth veins, activating the formation. In just an instant, it had trapped Zhang Yan within. Seeing this, the Taoist child suddenly cried out, "Not good, I've caused trouble." This formation was originally used to trap demons and beasts, and it also had the effect of defending against enemies. This child had only recently learned it, and he was still familiarizing himself with it these few days. However, because he was too tired from practicing, he was just now lying down to rest for a while. When he first saw Zhang Yan, he was startled because he saw an outsider, and without thinking, he activated the formation. This child knew that he had made a huge mistake. Trembling, he took out a talisman from his sleeve, wanting to stop the formation. However, he had only learned how to activate the formation, and he didn't know how to break it. He was sweating for a while, but the copper pillars still didn't descend. Instead, the sound became louder. He couldn't help but panic. Although only a short moment had passed, it felt like a long time had passed since just now. he said. It's been so long that person wouldn't have died, right? Originally, he didn't want to alarm the monastery head to avoid punishment, but thinking about the crime of killing someone from the same sect, he couldn't bear the consequences, so he hurriedly cried out. Not long after, a bearded old Taoist rushed out, and when he raised his head to take a look, he knew someone was trapped in the formation. After he asked about the situation, he couldn't help but be angry, and he scolded, "Tong, how could you be so reckless?" The child lowered his head. "I know I was wrong." Daoren sighed, frowning as he looked at it. He snatched the talisman, and with a spell, he wanted to close the formation. However, just now, the talisman had already broken into pieces. He couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Once the talisman broke, it meant that the person in the formation had already touched the pivot of the formation door. At the very least, one of the formation doors had been destroyed. To have such power, the person who came was at least a core formation cultivator, so there was no need to worry too much. At this moment, he only needed to wait for it to exit the formation. However, he did not know the identity of the visitor and was still worried, so he said, "Tong, take my seal and block off the spirit vein at the foot of the mountain." The child was about to speak when Daoren sighed and said, "It's better if I do it myself. You stay here and watch." The boy nodded repeatedly in agreement. Daoren took a step forward. The astral wind enveloped his body, lifting him up as he flew towards the foot of the mountain. It was all because of the spirit vein in the mountain. As long as he could find a way to break it, it would collapse on its own. However, doing this would inevitably damage the spirit vein. If it wasn't for his disciple's fault, he wouldn't have been willing to do this. The moment the formation was activated, Zhang Yan had already flown away on his sword, but the formation was rather strange. In the blink of an eye, it locked down this part of the world, especially the ability to move the void. No matter where he flew to, he would have to return to the formation. After flying twice, he no longer acted rashly. Instead, he paid attention to the location of the array door. When the copper pillar was fully extended, a sharp metal wind blew from within the formation. At the same time, the copper pillar disappeared without a trace. Zhang Yan scoffed. The astral cloud above his head turned, casting down a ray of treasure light that covered his body, easily blocking the metal wind outside. Then he looked around. Now, he had a rough understanding of the path of formations. After a brief observation, he knew that the crux of the formation was on the 8 copper pillars. As long as he destroyed them, the formation would be broken. However, even if normal people knew, they couldn't do anything about it. That was because one look at the 8 copper pillars and they knew that they were made using a secret technique to purposely attract people into the formation to attack. If the formation didn't break after a long time and no one could break it, sooner or later, they would be trapped in the formation. Zhang Yan smiled. If this formation was managed by someone, he would have to spend a lot of effort. However, he didn't have to care about it now. With a thought, he took out the star's sword ball and turned it into a ray of sword light. Then he poured all the mana in his body into it. The brilliant flame suddenly increased and turned into a sharp sword aura. It was dazzling and cold, and it shone on the entire place. He took a light breath and shouted. He rode the sword light and slashed at a copper pillar in his memory. After a sizzling sound, the formation suddenly shook. Following that, half of a copper pillar appeared from the gray mist. Falling to the ground, the cut was smooth and clean, but there was a jade core mixed in the pillar. It looked yellow with a hint of white. The jade was tender and smooth. He could not help but raise his eyebrows. After one of the copper pillars was gone, the formation seemed to be missing a corner. The metal wind was slightly weaker than before. Zhang Yan knew that he did the right thing. With a thought, the sword light circled around and returned to his hand. Since this method was useful, he wasn't in a hurry to break the formation. He had already recognized that the jade in the pillar was not an ordinary item. If he took it, he could increase the power of his demon weapon formation. After thinking for a while, he waved his sleeve and the water element light fell like a waterfall. With just a roll, it was collected. Then, he calmly sacrificed the sword light again. Daoren only took a few breaths to run to the foot of the mountain. He arrived in front of a huge stone that was polished like a water mirror. He stuck the seal on it. Immediately, countless thin and dense green lines appeared. They kept circling around. It looked messy, but in fact it was a secret. This was the phantom image of the spiritual vein in the mountain. As long as he used Tao techniques to break it, the spiritual qi at the base of the mountain would also be cut off. Daoren summoned a short sword and suspended it in the air. He looked at it a few times and hesitated. It wasn't that he wasn't confident, but because he was an indecisive person. Just now, he was thinking of blocking the spiritual vein. Now, another thought popped up in his mind. If that person can come out without my help, won't I damage the spiritual vein and do this for nothing? Then, he thought, since I'm already here, how can I just watch and do nothing? Let's do it. While he was hesitating, an explosion suddenly came from the top of the mountain. It was as if the mountain had collapsed and the earth had sunk. He quivered and realized that the formation had been broken. Looking at the undamaged boulder, he secretly thanked his lucky stars. He stood up and flew toward the peak of the mountain. When he arrived at the front of the temple, he saw a young Taoist standing there with his hands behind his back. He was talking to his disciple about something. This person was calm and composed and didn't look the slightest bit disheveled. It was obvious that he didn't suffer much in the formation. He also saw a cloud above his head that was slowly rotating. He could tell that this person was also a nascent soul cultivator. He was slightly shocked and hurriedly descended from the flying light. He quickly walked forward and cupped his hands, saying, "May I know which fellow disciple has come? I Qiao Xiao, Fangchun Courtyard's assistant dean. Just now, my disciple was rude and offended Jinren. Please forgive him." Zhang Yan bowed back and said, "So it's Dean Xiao. I'm Zhang Yan. I'm here on sect leader's orders. What happened just now was just a small matter. There's no need to take it to heart." "It's actually Jinren Zhang?" Dean Xiao exclaimed. Although he spent his days setting up formations in the courtyard and rarely left Fangchun Courtyard, he didn't even know all the names of the top 10 disciples. However, Zhang Yan had heard Yu Chongyang mention them recently. He knew that Yu Chongyang had killed Hu Yunzhong with one strike. His flying sword technique was especially powerful. It could be said that there was another sword immortal in the sect. Now that this person was standing in front of him, he couldn't help but be shocked. "So it's Jinren Zhang who has come to visit. I apologize for not going out to greet you. May I know why you're here?" Zhang Yan didn't say anything and handed over the talisman. Dean Xiao took it and looked at it. He suddenly said, "So that's how it is. Jinren Zhang is a Yuanying Jinren. It's not suitable for you to ride the flying starry palace. Only the towering cloud tower is suitable." Zhang Yan couldn't help but be slightly surprised. The flying starry palace and the towering cloud tower couldn't be mentioned in the same breath. The latter could already be considered a treasure. Not only could it fly above the extreme heaven, it could also occupy mountains and rivers and temporarily use it as a cave. It was just that it wasn't Yuanying and couldn't be controlled. But this kind of treasure was created by Bao Yang Courtyard. Why did they have to come to Fangchun Courtyard to ask for it? Dean Xiao saw his confusion and put away the talisman. He explained, Bao Yang Courtyard spent 100 years to create 5 towering cloud towers. Just now, they were delivered here. They want Fangchun Courtyard to set up the restrictions. However, our courtyard is currently lacking manpower. To take care of this thing, it will probably take another 10 years. Zhang Yan was surprised. Why would it take so long? Dean Xiao smiled bitterly. Once the masters of the various islands' great formations change, Fangchun Courtyard has to come forward to take care of them. They have to set them up again. There are also some flying starry palace cloud towers, formation flags, and decorations. If the restrictions are damaged, they have to be sent to the courtyard to be repaired. There are only a dozen or so people inside and outside the courtyard. How can we find the time? Originally, when the aristocratic families were in charge, because they had been in charge of Fangchun Courtyard for 100 years, they were familiar with it. But after the master and disciple line of cultivators changed, the aristocratic families were all evacuated. Now, there were only 2 chancellors and 5 deacons in the courtyard. There weren't even many children. They still had to cultivate, so how could they be so busy? For example, Yu Chongyang had to seize the opportunity to cultivate when he was on duty. He was afraid that his achievements would be delayed because of the courtyard's matters. Helpless, Dean Xiao could only find the children under him to hand over some unimportant formations and restrictions to him so that he could be free to take care of other matters. Originally, Fangchen Courtyard didn't have a single person come in for many years. Even if something went wrong, it would be fine, so he was very relieved. But he didn't think that there would still be a mistake. Zhang Yan asked doubtfully, "Dean Xiao, could it be that you can't even find the person who set up the restrictions in such a large mountain gate?" Dean Xiao sighed and said, "How would Shenren Zhang know? This cloud tower needs to refine the 4 extreme restrictions. Every corner of the formation needs at least one Yuanian cultivator to oversee and set it up. Only then can it be safe. Moreover, this person must know the wondrous use of formations. I can find a few Yuanian people, but there isn't a single person who understands formations. Even the cleverest housewife can't cook without rice." Zhang Yan thought about it. This sword competition was different from the past. It was a battle for the fate of the Xian men and demonic sects. It was hard to guarantee that the other party wouldn't come up with some strange scheme. If he had the help of this cloud tower, no matter how strong the opponent was, he would be able to resist for a while. He stopped thinking and said, "There's no harm in that. I'm willing to help from the side." Dean Xiao said in surprise, "Could it be that Zhenren Zhang is also proficient in formations?" Zhang Yan nodded and said with a smile, "I only know a thing or two. There's no harm in giving it a try." Dean Xiao lowered his head in thought. Setting up this kind of restriction required the help of the heavenly furnace of earth fire. Even he had to be careful. If something went wrong, even the Great Way's cloud tower would be destroyed. He was a little worried. But if he didn't agree, it would be clearly doubting whether Zhang Yan had the ability to do so. It was obvious that he would offend someone. His old habit of indecision came back again. After thinking for a long time, he still couldn't come up with a plan. He wanted to say something but stopped himself. He was so anxious that sweat began to appear on his forehead. Zhang Yan waited at the side for a while. Seeing him like this from start to finish, he couldn't help but laugh. "Even if this Great Way's cloud tower is destroyed, I can just give it up. Why is Dean so troubled?" Chapter 5:18. Although monastery head Xiao heard Zhang Yan say this, he was still a bit worried. After thinking about it for a long time, he reluctantly agreed. He rolled up his sleeve and took out a jade slip, solemnly placing it in Zhang Yan's hands. "Sage Zhang, this slip lists all kinds of restrictions and talismans. If you study it thoroughly, it will be easy to control the lofty cloud tower." Zhang Yan accepted the jade slip and held it in his hand. He thought to himself, "My guess was correct. There really is such a thing. With this, I have a 90% chance of setting up the restrictions." The reason he dared to agree to this matter was not because he was trying to show off, but because he was confident that he could familiarize himself with this method in an extremely short period of time with this jade slip. He was determined to obtain the lofty cloud tower. He would definitely not be willing to wait 10 years. By that time, he would have already missed the battle of magical techniques. Even if he obtained it, it would not be of much use. Although monastery head Xiao handed over the jade slip, he was afraid that Zhang Yan would not understand the intricacies of it. He repeatedly reminded him to remember some of the difficult points and not to skip over them. Logically speaking, it was a good thing to have someone who was willing to teach him everything he knew by his side. How could this old Taoist be so eager to break his words into 10 sentences? It had not been a long time since he had mentioned the matter he had just mentioned. It was a little annoying. A cultivator's memory was far superior to that of an ordinary person's, and they could remember things after just one time. However, this old man kept on talking, and even Zhang Yan could not help but frown slightly. As for the boy who was serving him, he had already fallen asleep. Zhang Yan thought to himself, no wonder there was not a single person to be seen on the way here. He was probably tired of this monastery head's glib tongue. Thinking about how he still had to spend a long time with this monastery head, he could not help but shake his head. He would just treat it as training his mental state. As monastery head Xiao spoke, he also constantly probed Zhang Yan. The wondrous uses of restrictions that he taught were difficult parts that people who didn't study formations wouldn't be able to understand. As they conversed, it seemed that Zhang Yan really did understand a little bit. Only then did he feel slightly relieved. He praised, "Shinran, I didn't expect that other than your extraordinary Dao techniques, you even dabbled in the Dao of formations. You are indeed a genius bestowed by the heavens in our Qinsong school." Zhang Yan hurriedly said a few words of modesty. Although this Daoren was long-winded, he was still a real talent. If he could form a good relationship with him, he would be able to benefit from him in the future. Vice-Chancellor Qiao chuckled. "With your help, I'll be able to finish this restriction in 3 years at most." At this point, he seemed to have thought of something and frowned. He raised his head to look at the sky and counted with his fingers. He muttered, "It's about time." His expression suddenly changed, and he grabbed Zhang Yan's sleeve. "Taoist Zhang, quickly follow me to the earthly fire heavenly furnace." Zhang Yan asked in surprise, "Are we going now?" Just now, he had only skimmed through the jade scroll once. He was not very familiar with it yet. If he were to rush into it now, he might not be able to do it. Dean Xiao said, "Zhenren might not know, but the towering cloud watchtower is going to refine a forbidden formation. The entire heavenly furnace of earthly fire is needed. This old Taoist has calculated the time, and I'm afraid that there will be other families who will be using this place in the next few days. If I'm late and it gets occupied, waiting for a few years will be normal." When Zhang Yan heard this, he didn't dare to delay. He immediately stood up and occupied the heavenly cauldron on the left and right first before talking about other things. Chancellor Qiao was about to move when he smacked his forehead. He said, "Zhenren Zhang, please wait for a moment. Let Daoren settle the matters in the courtyard, and then we will leave." He spent a full 15 minutes explaining everything to the boy, inside and out, until the boy was dispirited and dispirited. Only then was he satisfied. He called out to Zhang Yan and rode a ray of light out of the Fangchen courtyard. The two of them flew in the sky. To outsiders, their speed was extremely fast. However, in Zhang Yan's view, although Chancellor Qiao could also ride the astral winds, his speed was slow. The astral energy around his body was turbid and not pure. Not to mention his current speed, even if he used the sword escape to fly when he was condensing his core, this Daoren might not be able to catch up. Zhang Yan thought that this person was probably like Zhou Chongju, a cultivator who gave up on cultivating divine abilities and spells and only focused on improving his cultivation. However, he could also understand this Doran's choice. If it wasn't like that, he probably didn't have any profound achievements in formations. After flying for a while, the two of them arrived above the heavenly cauldron. It was also Zhang Yan's first time here. He stooped down and saw a scorched continent floating on the water. Water vapor rose, and fog covered the mountains. There were no aquatic creatures in the surroundings. Looking closely, he realized that the entire island was made of black reefs and iron rocks. There were thousands of paths and hundreds of rivers. What flowed was not river water, but blazing fire and boiling oil. There were 3 mountains in the continent, and they were all billowing with black smoke. Dust filled the sky and clouds. If it wasn't for the restriction formation isolating this place, perhaps half of the Great Swallow Dragon Swamp would have been covered. As the two of them got closer, a shocking heat wave hit them. Even they found it difficult to bear, so they hurriedly opened their protective treasure light. This heavenly cauldron was several times larger than the one Zhang Yan saw on Twin Moon Peak. If the heavenly cauldron of the Zhenluo Union was only capable of opening a cave and moving the energy of the earth, then the one in front of them already had the ability to change mountains and rivers. Only a sect with 10,000 years of history like the Qinsong school could do something like this. Because of the comparison, Zhang Yan couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Chancellor Qiao glanced at him and pointed below, saying, "I'm afraid Spiritual Master Zhang has never been here before." This heavenly cauldron was created by the 4th headmaster. Back then, this founding master led the 6 Dongtian spiritual masters of our Qinsong school to the depths of the swamp. It took them 60 years to refine it. Among the Shenmen sects, Only the heavenly cauldron of the Yuxiao school can compare. Even the Shaoqing sect can't compare. Zhang Yan nodded his head. This fourth headmaster was the grand disciple of the third headmaster, Yuan Zhongzi. Although he wasn't famous, he could be called the person who carried on the past and opened up the future of the Qinsong school. He had already cultivated to the realm of ascension, but for some reason he was forced to stay in this world until his lifespan was exhausted. This headmaster had also been in power for the longest time, nearly 6,000 years. Not only did he double the size of the Great Longyan Swamp, he also personally set the layout of the 9 academies and gathered countless talented disciples. The reason why the previous headmaster, Qin Qingang, was able to push Qinsong School to become the #1 school in Donghua was not unrelated to the wealth he had accumulated. Chancellor Qiao's gaze swept back and forth a few times. Suddenly, his face lit up and he said, "Looks like no one has arrived first. We can go down and occupy it first. Spiritual Master Zhang, wait here for a moment. The deacon Taoist below is martial nephew Daoren. I'll go greet him and open the restriction, then the two of us can enter." After saying this, he cupped his hands at Zhang Yan and turned into a stream of light, descending. Not long after, he stopped on a high rock. A deacon Taoist with bright eyes, a lion's nose, and a wide mouth walked up. This person was only a core formation cultivator, but his expression and tone showed no respect for Chancellor Qiao at all. He said lazily, "Uncle Master is here again. What are you playing with this time?" Chancellor Qiao said, "To be honest, Martial Nephew Su, we are here for the lofty cloud tower. I hope Martial Nephew can bring the token and let us in." Taoist Su frowned and sighed. "Uncle Master, you came at a bad time. If it was something else, I could still make an exception, but this won't do." Chancellor Qiao was stunned. "Why is that?" Taoist Su shook his head. 2 months ago, Spiritual Master Wang of Glittering Jewel Grotto Heaven came to greet us. He wanted to borrow this earthly fire heavenly cauldron to refine the cloud tower restriction. "Uncle Master, you came a step too late." Chancellor Qiao snorted and waved his sleeves. "I have cultivated in the sect for hundreds of years and have come here dozens of times. It has always been first come, first served. I have never heard of such a rule. If they don't come, how can they make others wait? If they don't come for a year, can't they wait for a year? Martial Nephew, don't delay. Quickly open the restriction." Taoist Su laughed coldly and said, "I was entrusted by the elders of the sect to take charge of this forbidden area. I have to set up the rules so that others won't say that I'm doing nothing. Uncle Master, please don't make things difficult for me." That Spiritual Master Wang was under Spiritual Master Qinyu, and although Chancellor Qiao was also a Yuanying spiritual master, other than studying formations, he didn't practice any divine arts or techniques. His position in the sect wasn't high, so how could he be willing to offend Glittering Jewel Grotto Heaven for this Daoren? Chancellor Qiao was pushed back, and his beard trembled in anger, but he couldn't think of a solution. At this moment, a golden light pierced through the clouds and landed on the ground. After the light dissipated, a young Taoist wearing a turtle-tailed robe with large sleeves appeared. He looked around and said, "Chancellor Qiao, have you encountered some difficulties?" Taoist Su saw Zhang Yan and felt the vast astral wind that had yet to dissipate. He knew that the newcomer was also a Yuanying spiritual master, and his expression couldn't help trembling. Chancellor Qiao told him the reason, and finally pointed at Taoist Su. He said angrily, "This junior is Daoren Martial Nephew, but he doesn't give us any face and refuses to open the restriction." Zhang Yan thought for a moment, then asked, "Chancellor Qiao, is this the only earth fire heavenly furnace in our sect?" Chancellor Qiao thought for a moment, then said, "The Chen clan also has a heavenly furnace, but it's slightly smaller than this one. It was created by the second-generation sect master, Ancestor Chen. However, it's only for the Chen clan's private use, and the disciples of the same sect rarely benefit from it. Also, Spiritual Master Yen has a treasure that can also be used as a heavenly furnace. If Spiritual Master Zhang has a way, you can give it a try." Zhang Yan knew that neither of these two paths would work. He looked up and said to Taoist Su, "I Zhang Yan, the sect master's token is here. Quickly go and bring it here." So it's spiritual Master Zhang. Taoist Su turned pale with fright. How could he not have heard of Zhang Yan's name? He couldn't help but panic. His eyes turned and he hurriedly bowed. He said, "Since spiritual Master Zhang has come here, how can I stop you? I don't have the token with me. Please wait here for a moment, I'll go get it right now." Zhang Yan glanced at him, but didn't say anything. Taoist Su bowed again, then went inside. Chancellor Qiao smiled bitterly. "I didn't expect spiritual Master Zhang's name to be so useful. My martial nephew doesn't dare to disobey." Zhang Yan blushed. "Don't dare? That might not be the case." Chancellor Qiao didn't understand. Zhang Yan smiled but didn't explain. Taoist Su went around a few stone pillars, and after a few turns he arrived inside the forbidden formation. Wiping the cold sweat off his forehead, he said, "When did this old thing get to know such a person? This is difficult. I can't afford to offend either side, so I'll let them fight among themselves." He took out a Howling Lake golden sword from his sleeve. He chanted an incantation, and with a point of his finger, the sword suddenly let out a howl and flew into the air. Then, it turned into a beam of golden light and flew into the distance. Chapter 5:19. P.S. Today is the first time. After sending out the Howling Lake golden sword, Taoist Su lingered in place for a while. Feeling that it was about time, he took out the talisman from a stone box and dragged his feet out. When he was in front of Zhang Yan, he raised his hands and presented the talisman with a smile. "Taoist Zhang, the talisman is here. With this, you can control this heavenly cauldron." Monastery head Qiao was overjoyed. As long as he got the talisman and asked for the incantation, he wouldn't have to be afraid even if someone else came. However, just as the talisman was about to be handed to him, a shout came from the sky. "Wait!" Taoist Su blinked and nimbly put the talisman back into his sleeves. In truth, there was no harm in handing over the talisman. The sect was afraid that someone would use it to cause trouble, so the incantation would be changed every month. The two attendants took turns using it, so other than him, no one else knew about it. Monastery head Qiao was dissatisfied with his actions and snorted angrily. Turning his head, he saw a ray of light flying to the top of the clouds. After the light dissipated, 3 people came out. One of them was an old woman with a head full of white frost. She was short, not even 3 feet tall. She held an 8-section python staff and was accompanied by 2 middle-aged women. She didn't even look at Zhang Yan and monastery head Qiao. She just said coldly to Taoist Su, "Su Jing, what did I say in my letter? How could you give the talisman to someone else?" Taoist Su lowered his head and put on a wronged expression. He cupped his hands. "Please forgive me, Taoist Wang. It's just that Taoist Zhang said that with the sect master's talisman in hand, I'm just a guard. How could I dare to disobey?" Sect master's talisman? Only then did Taoist Wang turn his head and look at Zhang Yan seriously. He felt that he looked familiar. After thinking about it, he couldn't help but be shocked. He thought to himself, could it be Zhang Yan of Clear Nether Lake? Taoist Su was also a schemer. He was afraid that if he revealed Zhang Yan's identity, Wang Zhenren would not come and take it out on him. Therefore, the golden sword of the Howling Lake did not say anything, but only urged the sword light urgently, which made it obvious that something had changed. Wang Zhenren didn't know what was going on and rushed over as soon as he received the golden sword. If she had known Zhang Yan's identity earlier, she might have considered it. But now that she was here, she was in a difficult position. Chancellor Qiao moved to Zhang Yan's side and said in a low voice, "This person is from the Glittering Jewel Cave abode. Perfected Qin's 5th disciple, perfected Wang Xiangrong." Although Taoist Master Qin took in many disciples. However, there were only 5 who achieved Yuanying, and 3 of them had already died of old age. Apart from Zhong Muqing, only Wang Xiangrong and a woman called by Qingyan were still cultivating in the residence. Wang Xiangrong secretly scolded Taoist Su a few times, but on the surface, she had to be polite and said, "So it's Zhenren Zhang, this old one greets you." She took hold of her crutch and bowed slightly. Zhang Yan smiled and also cupped his hands to return the greeting. Wang Xiangrong coughed and said, "This old one has heard of it." Sect Master Uncle had ordered Jinren Zhang to stay in seclusion for 5 years and not to hear about the matters of the sect. But Jinren Zhang, why aren't you meditating and cultivating in the residence? What are you doing here? If it was another cave abode, she could still rely on the name of the Glittering Jewel Cave Abode to do things, but Zhang Yan was different. Putting aside the fact that he was one of the top 10 disciples in the sect, his teacher, Zhou Chongju, was the Dao companion of her teacher, Qin Yu. Relying on the sect alone was not enough to suppress him, so she could only think of a solution from elsewhere. Before Zhang Yan could speak, Chancellor Qiao had already taken a step forward and said, "I'm sure Wang Jinrenzhang has heard it just now. Jinrenzhang is here on the orders of the sect master, not to disobey the decree." Wang Xiangrong mumbled something and said helplessly, "Jinrenzhang, how about I make a deal with you?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Jinrenzhang, please speak." Wang Xiangrong pulled herself together and said, "Jinrenzhang should know that my martial nephew, Zhong Muqing, will be going to the 16 Sects Sword Competition Assembly in 5 years. He needs the lofty cloud watchtower to protect him. It's just that it will take a long time to refine the restriction. If I let Jinrenzhang rush over first and delay it for a few years, I'm afraid it won't be of use anymore. I wonder if Jinrenzhang can borrow this furnace from my Glittering Jewel Cave Abode first? Take it as a favor." Although Zhong Muqing was Jinren Qin's disciple, he used to be Meng Zhen's disciple. In order to take care of Meng Zhen's reputation, Qin Yu only allowed him to be a disciple of hers. But that was just a title. Zhong Muqing's divine arts and techniques were all taught by her personally. If Jinren Qin didn't ascend, he would die at the end of his lifespan. Zhong Muqing was one of the top 10 disciples. If he became a cave in the future, he could still maintain the Glittering Jewel Cave Abode. His success or failure could be said to be related to the future of the cave abode, so everyone would do their best to help him. Wang Xiangrong was also Jinren Qin's disciple. Seeing that she was going to die at the end of her lifespan, in order to win her master's favor, she took the initiative to take on the task of refining the restriction. First, she borrowed many restriction refining experts from the aristocratic families with Jinren Qin's reputation. Then she sent a letter to the earthly fire heavenly furnace. She thought that it was already safe, but she didn't expect that there would be a problem at the last moment. Zhang Yan smiled and said without giving in, "I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint Jinren Wang. I'm here on the order of the sect master, so I have no choice." Wang Xiangrong was suddenly speechless. She knew that this matter couldn't be persuaded by words. Her face darkened and she said, "Jinren Zhang, if this heavenly furnace is occupied by you, I don't know how long it will take. You also know that you can't go to the sword competition, so you're not in a hurry to use this thing. Now it's clear that you're going against the Glittering Jewel Cave Abode. What are your intentions?" There weren't many Yuanian cultivators in the sect who were qualified to ride the Great Lofty Cloud Tower. This sword competition also involved the Battle of the Devil's Doctrine and Xianmen. To ensure that nothing went wrong, people like Huoxian, Luo Qingyu, and the others had to use the Great Lofty Cloud Tower to protect them. Huoxian had the Chun clan to rely on, and he himself had entered the Yuanying for decades. He had already arranged the restriction of the Great Lofty Cloud Tower. Luo Qingyu was Jinren Yan's disciple. With the treasure in hand, there was no need to worry about refining the restriction. Only Zhong Muqing was different. If he wanted to refine the restriction, he could only go to the Fangchen courtyard to ask. Originally, he was not in a hurry. Even if Qinsong School didn't have the heavenly furnace to use, he could still go to Pingdu sect to refine it. However, Zhang Yan killed Elder Hu, and only received a small punishment of being locked up for 5 years. The relationship between the two sects hadn't been reconciled yet, so he could only think of a way in the sect first. Zhang Yan sneered and looked over, saying, "Jinren Wang, why do you say that? I don't have such intentions. If you're not willing to let go, then there's no need to say more. You and I will fight here, and the loser will leave. What do you think?" Wang Xiangrong couldn't help but hesitate. Since Zhang Yan killed Elder Hu, what he had done in the Middle Pillar State and Donghai had also been dug out. Now his fierce reputation was too great. She felt that she was not his opponent, but she was also unwilling to retreat. She thought to herself, I'm not his opponent alone. Why don't I call my junior sister over? The two of us can work together. I don't believe that we can't suppress his arrogance. After making up her mind, she opened her mouth and said, Okay, I will agree to Jinren Zhang's request. However, Jinren Qiao is here, and I need to ask someone to make a decision. Zhang Yan nodded and said, Of course. Wang Xiangrong raised her hand, and a middle-aged woman behind her took out a pen and paper. She wrote a line of words and put it away. Then she cast a spell into the air, and the talisman flew away without a trace. After waiting quietly for half an hour, she saw a conveyance light on the cloud. Wang Xiangrong quickly pulled up the cloud and went to meet it. But when she saw who it was, she couldn't help but be startled. The other party wasn't her junior sister, but a round-faced youth. This person wore a bamboo hat, a coarse shirt, and a pair of straw sandals. He held a fishing rod on his back, and his eyes were very bright. After seeing her, he smiled and said, You must be Martial Nephew Wang? Wang Xiangrong was surprised and said, Who are you? The youth smiled and said, I am Shen Baishuang. Just now I am a guest in Linlang Cave Mansion. I saw that you sent a letter and heard about what happened here. Since I have nothing to do, I will make a trip on behalf of Martial Nephew Bai. Wang Xiangrong quickly knelt down on the cloud and said with surprise, So Martial Uncle is here. Please accept Martial Nephew Rong's bow. Shen Baishuang's face was full of smiles. He raised his hands and said, Martial Nephew, please rise. I don't have that many rules here. Wang Xiangrong was relieved and stood up. She knew that this martial uncle was the disciple of the original Grand Elder Shui Yuming. Not only was his seniority very high, he was also a Yuanying third-tier cultivator and was only a step away from Grotto Heaven Realm. Zhang Yan was definitely not his opponent. She couldn't help but sneer and say, With this martial uncle supporting me, let's see if Zhang Yan dares to fight with me like this. Shen Baishuang looked at Zhang Yan, but there was not a trace of hostility in his eyes. He just asked curiously, Are you Zhang Yan? Zhang Yan cupped his hands and bowed, Yes. Shen Baishuang smiled and said, Martial Nephew Zhang, I heard that your flying sword killing technique is very good. I have recently refined a magic sword, and I don't know if it can be used on stage, so I want to try it on you. Are you willing to help me? Zhang Yan smiled and said casually, Shinren, please make your move. Shen Baishuang's eyes lit up, and he nodded and praised, All right, take it. He stretched out his hand and pointed downwards, and a violent wave was cast down. Jade beads splashed everywhere, spiraling gracefully in the air. The magic sword was drawn to the front of the wave, and only an indiscernible sword edge could be seen. The body of the sword seemed to have blended into the wave of spiritual qi, and it was unclear whether it was long or short, hard or soft. With a command in Zhang Yan's heart, the stellar sword pellet swiftly flew out and sprayed out a sword light that was like a graceful swan. Within the boundless waves of water, it extremely accurately found the tip of the sword and slashed upwards. Like a drop of water falling into a spring, there was a ding sound. The magic sword was hit, and it suddenly turned into clear water. It brushed past the sword pellet and actually turned into two sword flows, attacking downward. Zhang Yan didn't show any weakness, and with a shout, the sword pellet shook and split into two sword lights. They went to meet each other, but when they came into contact with the sword flow, there was another clear sound, and the sword flow turned into four, still flying over with the same momentum. The star's sword pellet suddenly split again, and this time, another four sword lights flew out and collided with the sword flow. After hearing a few soft sounds, when he looked at the sword stream again, it had already turned into 8 streams. Zhang Yan squinted his eyes slightly. The sword flow actually didn't come fast. Originally, the two of them were 500 feet apart, but after 3 clashes, it had unknowingly shrunk to within 200 feet. With just one move, it would probably reach his inner circle. Chapter 520. P.S. Second update. Shen Baishuang stood on the cloud, staring at the battle below with a smile on his face. The fishing rod on his shoulder swayed gently, as if he was sitting on the shore waiting for the fish to swim over. His behavior and expression were very comfortable. Zhang Yan had experienced many battles of life and death since he started his cultivation. It wasn't like he had never encountered a cultivator of the 3rd grade of Yuanying. His experience in fighting enemies was unparalleled among his peers. He was very clear that when fighting with an enemy, he had to control the situation and not let the opponent dominate. Otherwise, he would definitely be at a disadvantage. As for the sword current, he didn't know the details of it. With a rough look, he only knew that there seemed to be a method of splitting and combining. Although it wasn't fast, it wouldn't be appropriate if he continued to resist it. He had 2 choices at the moment. One was to find a way to turn around and retreat. After looking for a flaw, he could then defeat the enemy. The other was to ignore what was in front of him and attack the enemy to force the enemy to stop and regain the initiative. However, just as he wanted to make a move, a warning came from the depths of his heart, reminding him that he couldn't do that. Otherwise, he would definitely lose this battle. With a change of thought, he stopped moving. But with this delay, the sword current got closer. At this moment, it had already split into 32 and was only 100 feet away from him. It was as if it could reach him in the next moment. Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed as he pondered. It was impossible for the sword current to split endlessly. Otherwise, who in the world would be able to stop it? And since Shen Baishuang said it was a sword test, there must be a flaw in it. It was just a matter of whether he could catch it or not. At this moment, countless thoughts flashed through his mind. Finally, he made up his mind. Not only did he not dodge, he shook the sword pill and wanted to transform all 64 sword gleams to disperse the sword current. But just as he was communicating with the sword pill, he suddenly felt a mysterious reaction. At this moment, he seemed to have thought of something. A sharp light shone in his eyes and he let out a clear whistle. One of the sword gleams moved inexplicably and countless fine sword gleams flew out. They shot out and hit the sword current. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared. Shen Baishuang's expression was leisurely, but seeing this scene, the fishing rod on his shoulders suddenly stopped, a look of surprise appearing on his face. Zhang Yan's spirit was greatly boosted by the success of one sword strike. He hurriedly controlled the sword light and rushed toward the next sword current. This time, he did the same thing as last time. With a twist, he destroyed another stream of sword. At this time, he had already found a clue. He was no longer in a stalemate on the ground. Instead, he rode on his sword and flew away. Then he repeated the move just now. Under his continuous attacks, it only took a few breaths. Then, he killed the rest of the sword currents one by one. The last streak of sword flow finally dissipated when it was less than 3 feet away from him, no longer existing. Shen Baishuang obviously didn't expect the ending to come so soon. He waved his sleeve and gathered the remaining water vapor in the sky back into his hand. He sighed and said, "I'm still lacking a little. I haven't refined it completely." This sword was called the Rebirth Cloud Water Sword. The beauty of this magic weapon was that if a stream of sword energy couldn't be destroyed in one go, it would split again and again. The more it grew, the more it would grow. In the end, there would be tens of thousands of them. When the opponent couldn't block it anymore, they could only die under the sword. To deal with this sword, one could only be ruthless when the stream of sword energy was sparse, even if it had to pay a price. Otherwise, once the momentum was formed, it would be unstoppable. Shen Baishuang had a look of praise in his eyes. Zhang Yan had only blocked a few moves and he had already noticed the trick. Not only that, he was also so decisive in his attacks, which really made him admire him. However, he hadn't actually refined this sword yet. The minute changes were still not enough. If he refined it to the point where it was as small as dust, then it wouldn't be a match for a mere dozen of sword lights. It was rare for Zhang Yan to meet such an opponent. He was also excited to see it. Moreover, he had comprehended a new method and wanted to try it out. How could he miss such an opportunity? He raised the sword light and slashed over. Just now, he was keenly aware that this Shen Baishuang seemed to have some scruples and didn't want to hurt him. Therefore, he was at ease and boldly attacked. Shen Baishuang saw that Zhang Yan didn't stop after winning a round. Instead, he counterattacked. He was also startled. Then, he revealed a look of interest and said with a smile, "I came here today because I heard that there is a junior in the sect with extraordinary swordsmanship. He can be called a sword celestial. I wanted to see what kind of person he is, but I didn't expect him to give me such a surprise. Since martial nephew is interested, then as your martial uncle, I will accompany you to practice." He shook his shoulders, and the stellar chi around him suddenly split into two. One soared into the sky and turned into a clear chi that rushed into the blue sky, merging with the clouds in the sky. The other flew down and landed in the great swamp. In an instant, a torrential wave rose up. The clear and turbid chi covered the sky and earth. In an instant, Zhang Yan felt the spiritual chi around him stagnated, as if he was covered by a layer of shackles. He looked over in surprise. This person had actually cast a spell to seal the heaven and earth in an instant. In his memory, no matter if it was Shin Lin Tu from the Chongyu True Temple or Dragon Carpuaren, they had both used this method, but none of them could use it so easily like Shen Baishuang. Shen Baishuang didn't stop. He flipped his wrist and threw down the ball of water in his palm. He still released the cloud water sword. But when he attacked this time, it wasn't like before. As soon as this object descended, it instantly transformed into countless crystalline flying pearls that scattered in the air, and with a push of his magic power, there were thousands of sword streams that soared through the sky. When he looked over, they were gathered like a forest, dense like a rain of stars, and practically covered his field of vision. Zhang Yan was fearless. Just now, he was still a little cautious when dealing with the cloud water sword. Now that he had found a way to deal with it, he was much more at ease. The sword lights exploded one after another, like the scorching sun shining on the snow, constantly melting away the sword lights. Even though he was trapped in this part of the world, he relied on the minor universe teleportation to move about. Even though the thousands of water swords were extremely numerous, they weren't able to stop him. Moreover, every single strike of his sword would slash through a water sword, and as the water swords gradually decreased, he became more and more free and unrestrained. Shen Baishuang could also see that the method seemed to be newly comprehended by Zhang Yan. Seeing that he had mastered it in just a short while, even with his shrewdness, there was a hint of a slightly complicated look in his eyes. He shook his head. At this point, if he didn't insist on a life and death outcome, he could have already stopped. So he stretched out a finger and pointed, completely dispersing the sparse flow of swords that remained. He said, "Martial nephew Zhang, this sword of mine is probably unable to do anything to you. Let's call it a day." Zhang Yan bowed and said, "Thank you, Zhenren Shen, for your guidance." Shen Baishuang nodded at Zhang Yan and flew into the sky. He looked back and saw Wang Xiangrong still standing there in a daze. He couldn't help but smile and said, "Apprentice, nephew, what are you still doing here? Follow me back to the mansion." He waved his big sleeve and a faint yellow gas flew out and covered Wang Xiangrong. This old man was also a Yuaning Zhenren, but when he was wrapped by the yellow gas, he couldn't struggle at all. He was involuntarily pulled to the cloud and stood together with Zhuang Bufan. Then, he laughed and turned into a light and flew into the cloud. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. He also recognized this Dao technique. It was the Daoyuo Heavenly Sleeve, one of the 12 divine arts in the sect. He didn't expect Shen Baishuang to also know how to use it. Moreover, he was much more experienced than Zhuang Bufan. After watching the two of them leave, he put away the sword pellet and placed it in his palm. He closed his eyes and pondered for a moment. Suddenly, he stretched out his hand and pointed at the sword pellet. The sword pellet jumped and separated into a lustrous sword light. With a gentle push, 63 fine sword lights flew out. The lights were like stars and looked very beautiful. He looked at it for a moment and an idea came to his mind. All the sword lights suddenly gathered and returned to one pellet. In reality, the number of sword lights he split did not increase. He could still split them into 64. It was just that when he executed the sword lights before, the longest was only 10 feet, and the shortest was the size of a sword pellet. With this change, it was much more exquisite than before. He didn't think that after fighting with Shen Baishuang, when facing the enemy, he would understand a kind of wondrous use. It was a pity that he hadn't learned a high-level sword technique and could only rely on himself to figure it out and comprehend it while fighting. He had taken many crooked paths. It seemed that after the sword competition assembly, he would have to make a trip to Shaoqing sect. Monastery head Xiao rarely left the sect and had never fought with anyone in his life. Just now seeing the two of them fight, he couldn't help but be dazzled and gasp in amazement. He came up to stand with Zhang Yan and cupped his hands. He sighed and said, "Today I learned of Zhenren Zhang's divine skill. No wonder you were able to kill Hu Yunzhong with one sword." Zhang Yan shook his head. Just now Shen Baishuang had revealed a move before he left. It was obviously telling him that he hadn't used his full strength. After all, this person was a third-tier Yuanying expert. His cultivation was much higher than his. If they really fought without holding back, he felt that it would be very difficult to win this person purely based on Dao techniques. Especially that Dao technique of heaven and earth lock. He felt that he could still escape in front of Shenlin too, but this person couldn't. The speed of this technique was incomparably fast, and it almost restricted his sword escape technique to death. Unless he thoroughly studied the 5 elements escape technique, it would be extremely difficult for him to break out. Thinking about this, determination appeared in his eyes. He thought to himself, after this matter is settled, I'll cultivate that 5 elements escape technique with all my strength. At this moment, Shen Baishuang and Wang Xiangrong were flying on the clouds and were returning to Glittering Jewel Grotto. After half the journey, Wang Xiangrong finally couldn't help but ask, "Uncle Master, that Zhang Yan is definitely not your match. Why don't you try to defeat him?" Shen Baishuang looked at her irritated look and couldn't help but find it funny. He shook his head and said, "I'm a senior and my cultivation is higher than him. If I force him to give up the heavenly cauldron of earth fire, wouldn't I be bullying the weak? This child is the disciple that head Uncle Master has set his eyes on. This time, I'm here on orders. If I take him down rashly, have you thought about the matter behind this?" Wang Xiangrong deciphered the deeper meaning in Shen Baishuang's words and seemed to have thought of something. She couldn't help but shiver. She stammered, but if that's the case, junior nephew Zhong's cloud tower will be lost." Shen Baishuang laughed and said, "What's so difficult about this? In the past, when I was one of the top 10 disciples, I also had a lofty cloud tower. It's just that I haven't used it for many years, and it's useless to keep it. I'll just give it to junior nephew Zhong." Chapter 521. P.S. Part 3. Taoist Su's cultivation was not high, but when he saw the scene of Zhang Yan and Shen Baishuang fighting, he felt that his soul was shaken and he was terrified. When he thought about how he would die if he was hit by any one of the sword lights, he couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. Now that he saw Shen Baishuang and Wang Xiangrong retreat, he thought Zhang Yan had won, so he came over anxiously and put on a happy expression. He flattered, "Sage Shang's swordsmanship is indeed extraordinary. No wonder you're the #1 sword immortal in the sect." Monastery head Xiao hated his despicable appearance and snorted. "Where's the talisman?" Taoist Su hurriedly took out the talisman. Monastery head Xiao snatched it and said, "And the spell?" "Yes, there's still the spell." Because Taoist Su was restrained by the sect's rules, he couldn't say it out loud. He took out a talisman, bit his fingertip, and quickly wrote a line of incantations. He handed it over and licked his fingers, his eyes flickering. Monastery head Xiao read it once and chanted a few more lines. He felt the talisman in his sleeve tremble and knew the spell was correct. With a flick of his finger, the talisman turned into fragments and flew away. He said to Zhang Yan, "Sage Zhang, we can enter the restrictive formation now." Taoist Su hurriedly shouted, trying to curry favor with him. "Let me lead the way." There were countless restrictive formations set up around the heavenly furnace of earth fire. Without the talisman, it was impossible to fly. The first part of the journey was full of twists and turns. Not only was it easy to get lost, there were also stalagmites hundreds of meters tall, holding up a forest of stones. They were all where the formation doors were located. They were different from the bronze pillars in the Fengshen courtyard. Each one was over 30 meters wide. Even if Zhang Yan used his sword to cut them, he wouldn't be able to do anything for a while. The power of the formation was also incomparable. Zhang Yan thought that once the formation was activated, it would probably be able to kill Yuanying cultivators without a problem. It could be said to be heavily guarded. After all, Monastery Head Xiao was an experienced formation master. Every time he passed by a place, he would give a few comments and point out the key points in breaking the formation. Where was the deceptive formation? Where was the trick to break through? Where was the hiding place? Zhang Yan nodded repeatedly as he listened, memorizing everything he had said. He was already thinking that when he returned, he would definitely set up the array formation of Clear Nether Lake again. Only then would he be able to leave his residence and fight with ease. Taoist Su had a disapproving expression. Seeing his expression, Chancellor Qiao was a bit exasperated at his failure to live up to his expectations. My senior brother is a formation grandmaster, and you are his disciple. Yet he is lacking in this Tao. He has really lost all his face. Su Jing sneered as he walked in front, seemingly very disdainful. Monastery Head Xiao was even more dissatisfied. He pointed at his back and said, I've made a fool of myself in front of Taoist Master. My martial nephew's talent in formations is even greater than mine. If he continues to study it, his accomplishments will definitely be above ours. But now he's delusional enough to want to learn those divine abilities. Daoren feels his heart ache. It's a pity. Hearing that Taoist Su's talent was so high, Zhang Yan's heart moved and his eyes flashed. But when Taoist Su heard these words, for some reason, he clenched his fists and suddenly became excited. He said loudly, Yes, Martial Uncle is right. I have lost all my master's face, but what can I do? Back then, Master was killed by a great demon of the North Nether continent, and even his primordial spirit could not be found. Where was Martial Uncle at that time? Where were my senior brothers? After Master died, I, Su Jing, knew that although the Tao of formations can protect the sect, it cannot protect one's body. Without divine abilities, how can one obtain the Tao of longevity? He used almost all his strength to shout the last sentence, causing the stone forest to rumble. Zhang Yan glanced at him. He hadn't expected that this Taoist Su, who looked so vile, was actually someone who admired the Tao of longevity. Monastery Head Xiao was stunned. After a moment of silence, he said bitterly, Back then, it was your master who passed away. It wasn't that Martial Uncle didn't want to save him, but that I was under orders to guard a large formation and could not leave without permission, Taoist Su sneered. Martial Uncle doesn't need to explain. Even if you went, what could you do? You'd just be a bonus. Martial Nephew just wants Martial Uncle to know that I, Su Jing, will definitely not step onto this old path. Monastery Head Xiao seemed to have been touched, and his expression was somewhat dejected. He was depressed the entire way and had no intention of speaking. Only when they were about to reach their destination did he finally get a little angry. The three of them had unknowingly arrived at the highest peak of the continent. Because of the earth fire, there was not a single grass or tree here. In front of them were 9 jade platforms about an acre in size, carved with patterns of water and stars. They surrounded the mountain, and on each of them was a black banner of water that was 30 meters tall. They fluttered in the wind, and in the center was a bottomless pit. This place led straight to the lungs of the earth, and red clouds and black smoke constantly rose from it. Looking up from below, the sky was a black color, as if thunderclouds had gathered and a baleful aura was roiling. After venting, Taoist Su also seemed to have taken off his disguise. He no longer bowed and fawned like before. After sending the two of them to the depths of the heavenly furnace, he cupped his hands and was about to leave. However, at this moment, Zhang Yan called out to him. Su Jing, do you want to learn Tao techniques? Taoist Su couldn't help but be startled. It wasn't that he didn't have the thought of currying favor with Zhang Yan. What kind of status did the 10 great disciples have? If he could receive 1 or 2 of their guidance, it would definitely be extremely beneficial. However, he also knew that this was merely wishful thinking. Why would the other have the time to pay attention to a small character like him? Moreover, he had previously stirred up trouble, and he expected that the other would have a bad impression of him. Thus, he gave up on the thought. Now that he suddenly heard these words, he was at a loss for what to do. Zhang Yan smiled. If you really want to, I can give you a chance. However, you can't give up on the Tao of formations. You have to pick it up again. Are you willing? Taoist Su listened to the conditions and was slightly convinced. Although he wanted to learn Tao techniques, no one would teach him. Even if he died in the sect, he wouldn't be able to learn it. If he followed Zhang Yan, there would be a chance. Therefore, without thinking too much, he knelt on the ground and kowtowed. Zhenren Zhang, I am willing to listen to your instructions. Zhang Yan said in a low voice, don't be impatient. Just wait here. If it's fast, it'll be a year. If it's late, it'll be 3 years. I'll definitely send someone to find you. He didn't do this on a whim. What he thought was that becoming the Grand Supreme Elder of the Yao Yin clan was only a temporary measure. However, his disciple Wei Zihong was different. In the future, he would have to return to the small world to start his own clan. However, when the clan was first established, it would definitely be sparsely populated. As the head of the clan, he couldn't keep an eye on the formation all day, so he might as well find someone to guard it. This Su Jing was a suitable candidate. Although he was talented in the Tao of formations, his position in the clan wasn't high. Presumably, if he asked sect leader Qin for him, he would definitely not be rejected. As for the protective Tao techniques that this person wanted to learn, although the methods in the Qinsong school couldn't be taught, there were a few in the Yao Yin clan. Whether to teach them or not, it was up to Wei Zihong to decide. Monastery head Xiao sighed and didn't say anything. He said, Zhenren Zhang, before setting up the restriction, the lofty cloud watchtower needs to be thrown into the pit to absorb the extreme earthly aura baleful qi and fire lung spiritual essence. After a year, it can be refined. Would Zhenren Zhang like to wait a few more days? Zhang Yan pondered for a moment. He had already read through the Jade Scroll once. However, the method to refine the restriction was actually not complicated. With the help of the damaged jade, he would only need 3 months at most to become familiar with it. A year was more than enough, so he replied, Monastery head Xiao, you can start first. Monastery head Xiao made a sound of acknowledgement and flew up, landing on a jade platform in front of him. He took out an item from his sleeve and threw it out. A speck of spiritual light flew out and continuously spun under the contrast of the clouds, slowly expanding. In the end, it became an enormous palace nearly 1,500 feet in size. It then fell down, falling into the deep pit that connected to the earth below. Zhang Yan only took a glance, but he could vaguely see that the palace was filled with pavilions and halls, pavilions and flowers. All of them were exquisitely beautiful. It was not inferior to a Tao rite and was far from something the Flying Star Hub Palace could compare to. He had heard of it before. If his magic power was deep enough, under the activation of it, this cloud tower could be several times larger. Once it was refined successfully, it could probably even hold the dragon carp. Monastery head Xiao gazed at the deep pit with a solemn expression. He picked up the talisman on the high platform and gently shook it. He felt a rumbling sound under his feet. The smoke and fire seemed to be swept back and forth by a pair of invisible hands, constantly swaying. Taoist Su was quite perceptive. Seeing that Zhang Yan was temporarily fine, he said, Spiritual Master Zhang, in the belly of this mountain, there is a cave abode. It was left behind by a heavenly abode master of the sect thousands of years ago. It is very comfortable and can be used as a rest. Zhang Yan's eyes lit up. Left behind by a heavenly abode master, I wonder which senior it was? Taoist Su said awkwardly, My status is low, so I don't know. However, the previous attendant once said that behind the cave abode, there is a restriction that this spiritual master personally set up. It seems to be sealing something, but our cultivation is low. As soon as we get close, we will be pushed out by a strong wind. Zhang Yan's interest was immediately piqued and he said, Let me go take a look. Taoist Su bowed and said, Spiritual Master, please follow me. He made a hand seal, and a mist rose under his feet. He flew up along the mountain wall. Zhang Yan's body didn't move, but but there was a light wind that lifted him up. Back then, the Heavenly Abode Master also came here to refine some magic treasure, so he didn't stay far. Not long after, Taoist Su said that they had arrived. Zhang Yan looked up and saw that there was a cave door about 3 meters tall deep in the belly of the mountain. It was just right between two steep mountain walls that seemed to have been cut by knives and axes. It was extremely inconspicuous. In front of the cave door, there was a large rock that someone had moved over, blocking the way in. There was no restriction on the rock. It was probably placed here by a attendant to warn people not to barge in. In fact, it was not very useful. After Taoist Su landed, he took a few steps forward and raised his hand. A gust of smoke rose and moved the rock away, allowing it to fall down the mountain. He then pointed and said, "Spiritual Master, this is the place. The restriction is behind the cave abode. As a attendant, it is not convenient for me to go in, so I can only stay here." Zhang Yan nodded to show that he understood. With a thought, a strong wind stirred and the door of the cave abode slowly opened. After a while, the light of a pearl shone from inside. He smiled, waved his sleeve, and walked in. Chapter 522. P.S. Tomorrow at midnight. Zhang Yan stepped into the cave and looked around. He saw that the length and width of the cave was no more than 2 feet. It was cramped and a little stuffy. A bright pearl was placed on top of a bronze candlestick. There was a shrine platform on the wall with a cleansing earth tablet talisman placed on it. Under the circulation of spiritual energy, there was not the slightest bit of dirt in the cave. There was a jade couch in the corner, and it was covered with a thick brocade. The table had rotted long ago, and one of its legs had collapsed on the ground. Other than that, there was nothing else. The back of the cave wall was slightly sunken, and there was a secret door in it. He could faintly see a deep ravine, and he didn't know where it led to. It should be the place of restriction that Taoist Su mentioned. Zhang Yan wasn't in a hurry to go over. Even if there was no killing formation in the cave that such a senior lived in, there might be some hidden traps. If he wasn't careful, he might fall into a trap. He didn't want to be covered in dirt here, so he carefully examined it. After confirming that there were no problems, he felt at ease and went to the entrance of the ravine. He didn't act carelessly and released the protective light before taking a step forward. However, when his body leaned forward slightly, he felt a gust of strong wind whistling. At the same time, a strong force attacked his body, as if it wanted to push him out. He sensed the might of the astral wind for a moment, and he already had an understanding of it. This restriction should have sensed the arrival of someone and would automatically be activated. However, this kind of setup, if it couldn't expel the person in one go, then it would continue to operate until the spiritual energy was exhausted. He pondered for a moment and couldn't help but smile. He didn't use any method to break the restriction, he just stood there and didn't retreat for about half an hour. The strong wind became weaker and weaker. In the end, there was a crisp sound as if something had cracked, and then there was no more movement. Zhang Yan looked towards the direction of the cracking sound. It turned out that there was a very inconspicuous dragon-shaped jade pendant on the ceiling. There were a few cracks on it, and it seemed to be used as a mechanism for the restriction. This item had experienced many years, and the spiritual energy contained in it had already dissipated by more than half. It might be useful to stop a core formation cultivator like Taoist Su, but to Zhang Yan, with just a little bit of force, he broke it open. He glanced around a few more times, then waved his sleeve and walked inside. After walking for about 20-30 feet, he saw light again. Another cave appeared in front of him, and it was much more spacious than the one he saw from the outside. There was a golden pearl that was swallowing and spitting out dazzling light at the top of the cave, illuminating this place like it was daytime. On his left, there was another door, so he walked over. As soon as he entered, he unconsciously stopped. He saw a Taoist priest with a white face and black beard sitting on a meditation cushion in the middle of the cave. The priest held a rui scepter in his hand, and he had a peaceful face and a sage-like bearing. His body emitted waves of gentle light. It seemed to be protected by a strange treasure. However, at this time, The Taoist's eyelids suddenly moved, and he actually opened his eyes. He shouted, "Who is your master? How dare you trespass into my forbidden area? Why aren't you leaving yet?" With this shout, the grotto was suddenly filled with a huge pressure. It was like a stormy sea, as if this person had already been enraged. It seemed that this kind of power Zhang Yan had only felt from a few Taoist paradise masters in the sect. At this moment, he also couldn't help but want to leave. However, just now, his feet moved half a step, and he suddenly realized that something was wrong, but he stopped and looked up. He saw that the Taoist was only staring at him with wide eyes, but he didn't do anything extreme. Moreover, there seemed to be a trace of undetectable panic in the depths of his eyes. Zhang Yan had already calmed down at this moment. After a moment of recognition, he suddenly sneered and said, "Where did this demon come from? You're playing tricks, and you even occupy the body of my master's disciple. Get out here." As he spoke, a sword light rushed out of the top of the door, emitting a sharp brilliance. It kept flowing, and there was immediately a dense chill in the cave. The Taoist's face suddenly showed a look of horror. He hurriedly rolled away from the futon and hid in the corner, not daring to look at the sword light. He waved his hands and shouted, "Don't do it, don't do it." Zhang Yan shouted coldly, "Why don't you show your original body?" The Taoist didn't dare to disobey. Suddenly, his body softened and fell to the ground. Then, a thin white line climbed out of his ear and fell to the ground. This monster was as thick as an ordinary person's finger, 3 feet long, with a monkey's face and a snake's body. Its whole body was white, it had no feet, 2 tails, and there was a line of blood on its back. Its shape was very strange. When it rolled on the ground, it turned into a big-headed boy. However, being forced by the sword light, it just shrank under the feet of the Taoist and didn't dare to come over. At first, Zhang Yan didn't recognize what it was. After thinking for a while, he suddenly remembered and asked, "Bizarre language insect?" When the monster heard that Zhang Yan was able to see through its origin with just 1 sentence, its body couldn't help but tremble. It kept bowing and said, "Master Taoist has good eyesight. This little demon also has a surname. My name is Jingyu." Zhang Yan didn't think it was strange. He didn't think that there was such a thing in the world. Before he went up the mountain to cultivate, he had seen this demon figure in a strange book. Just now, thinking about it carefully, he felt that it should be this thing. This monster had a special ability. If it entered a human corpse, it only needed to eat the internal organs of the person and then it could borrow the corpse to move. It could imitate the appearance of the person when they were alive. Whether it was sitting, lying down, walking, or speaking habits, it could learn everything. Therefore, in ancient times, there were often people who missed their deceased relatives and caught this insect to comfort their grief. However, according to ancient records, this bizarre language insect was usually only the size of a grain of sand. It could enter a human body with water, but it was rare to see it grow to such a size. Zhang Yan knew that it didn't have any ability to hurt people, so he slightly retracted his sword light. He glanced at the Taoist and knew that it was just a corpse. He asked, "How long have you occupied this senior's body?" Jingyu didn't even think and answered very quickly, answering Master's question, "It's been more than 1,500 years." Zhang Yan asked curiously, "More than 1,000 years, you've been hiding here, and no one actually found out?" Jingyu drooped his head and said dejectedly, "In the past, there were cultivators who came here, but they were sent away by this little demon with a few words. I even told them not to disturb people's peace. This trick works every time, but it doesn't work on Master Taoist." Zhang Yan shook his head. Who would have thought that it was the bizarre language insect hiding here to play tricks? Even he was almost fooled. Fortunately, his observation was meticulous, and he found something wrong in time. This demon didn't have any flaws in other places, but there was one thing, and that was that its mouth and nose were not breathing, and its 7 orifices were malfunctioning. Its vitality had long been cut off. Any cultivator would be able to find it if they paid a little attention. However, the cultivators who came here earlier knew that this was the place where the Taoist of the heavenly abode cultivated. When they entered and saw someone here, They thought that the Taoist of the heavenly abode had not left yet. After being scared, how would they have the guts to stay here? They must have escaped as far as they could. When Zhang Yan heard Taoist Su talking about this, he felt it was strange. It was possible that no one came to disturb a Taoist of the heavenly abode for hundreds of years, but no one came to disturb him for more than 1,000 years. This was very unreasonable. It turned out that this demon was causing trouble. However, this bizarre language insect was so patient that it hid here for more than 1,000 years. He didn't believe that there was no reason for it, so he raised his eyebrows and asked, "Jing Yu, let me ask you, why are you hiding here?" Jing Yu's eyes rolled around, and he stuttered as if he didn't want to answer. Zhang Yan smiled and said leisurely, "Actually, if I kill you, I will spend some effort to search this cave. I think I will be able to find something." As he said this, he spread out his sword, and the brilliance increased as if he was going to rush out to kill Jing Yu. Jing Yu was shocked, and he quickly knelt down and begged for mercy. "Master Taoist, don't do it, don't do it. This little demon is actually here for a rare treasure. Bring it to Master Taoist." He turned around and picked up one of the Taoist's hands, and then he opened the 5 fingers. In the palm of the Taoist, there was a warm and greasy pill jade the size of a pigeon's egg. Just now, it was revealed, and it was emitting a warm brilliance. Even if Zhang Yan was standing 10 feet away, he could still feel the warm and genial air from it. Jing Yu was about to take it down, but he stepped forward and stretched out his hand to stop him. "Don't touch it." He looked at it seriously and sighed. "So that's how it is. It's actually a warm and good pill jade. With this, it's no wonder that this senior's body hasn't rotted after thousands of years. This pill jade could prevent things from rotting. Just now, if he rashly took it down, the Taoist's body would immediately be destroyed." Jing Yu said with admiration, "Master Taoist has good eyesight. This is it. When we cultivate, we don't absorb spiritual energy, and only eat ancient jade. This little demon doesn't have any supernatural power, and only knows how to play tricks. There are no external enemies in this Qinsong school, and there's this pill jade to eat, so I don't want to go out. In these thousands of years, I've been eating and sleeping here, and it's been peaceful." Speaking of this, he secretly glanced at Zhang Yan and added, "This is permitted by my master. Otherwise, this little demon wouldn't dare to touch the master's remains." Zhang Yan smiled faintly. If this demon didn't recognize this Taoist as its master, it definitely wouldn't be able to come here. This was the truth. Moreover, this demon answered fluently and had a submissive look. It was completely unlike ordinary demons who were stupid and didn't know etiquette. It was obvious that it was used to serving people. But to say that this Taoist allowed it to touch his body, that might not be true. However, he didn't have the mood to investigate and only asked, "Since that's the case, do you know this perfected one's name?" Jing Yu suddenly became spirited and said, "This little demon naturally knows my master's name. His surname is He Jingchen." He Jingchen? Zhang Yan looked surprised. He walked in front of the Taoist and released a gentle wind to straighten the corpse. After looking at it for a while, he made a Tao salute to it. Qinsong School had been established for tens of thousands of years. He didn't know much about those Grotto Heaven Taoists who had long passed away, but he had heard of this person. It was because this person was of the same generation as the previous sect leader, Qin Qinggang. He was one of the 12 Grotto Heaven Taoists who followed him into the North Underworld continent. He was originally famous, but he didn't expect that he would actually ascend to heaven here. Zhang Yan took a few steps back, but there was a trace of doubt in his heart. He said, "This perfected one's supernatural power is also shocking." The leader of the Deer tribe, one of the 8 demon tribes, died in the hands of this perfected one. In the mountain gate, there is also a Grotto Heaven. Why would he quietly die in this heavenly furnace of earth fire? Chapter 523. Zhang Yan always felt that this Jing Yu seemed to be hiding a lot of things from him, but right now they were not in his own cave residence and there was no enchantment to protect it. If someone was spying on them, he would not know, so there was no need to rush to investigate. He only said, Jing, you must not blaspheme the remains of this senior. When I am done here, you will return to the sect with me. He felt that this little demon seemed to have no ability, but if he was used in the right place, he might have a miraculous effect. Therefore, he decided to stay by his side in the future. Although Jing Yu was unwilling to leave this place, he also knew that it was difficult to disobey Zhang Yan's orders. If he dared to say anything, he would definitely be killed here. Therefore, he hurriedly made a vow and desperately expressed his loyalty. Zhang Yan looked at the remains of He Jingchen and pondered for a moment. He walked forward and waved his hand. A sword light flashed and the pill jade was divided by 1/3. Then he placed the corpse on the praying mat, bowed, and retreated from the place. When he was outside, he took out a few formation flags from his sleeve and set up another enchantment. When it was done, he brought Jing Yu back to the outermost cave. Jing Yu was quite discerning. He took the initiative to clean up the jade on the couch and found an incense burner from somewhere. After fiddling with it for a while, a mellow fragrance came out of the cave residence. Without waiting for Zhang Yan's order, he took the initiative to stand by the door. Zhang Yan sat on the jade couch and glanced at him. He said in a deep voice, "When I am comprehending the method, you are not allowed to walk around. If you go out and get killed, I will not stand up for you." Jing Yu hurriedly agreed. In fact, he was born timid and had not gone out for more than 1,000 years. Even if Zhang Yan did not say it, he did not dare to act rashly. Zhang Yan did not say anything. His hand gripped the jade remnant and his mind sank into it. He began to deduce the various methods of the sacrificial restriction. Jing Yu looked at the sword qi that was still circling above his head. His throat moved and he retreated a few steps against the cave wall. He curled up in a corner and spat out a sleeve from his abdomen. He rummaged around for a while and took out a handful of jade fragments. He poured them into his mouth and then copied Zhang Yan, sitting there to cultivate. Although refining the Cloud Watchtower's restrictions was difficult, monastery head Xiao had already explained it to him. As a result, this process was even faster than Zhang Yan had imagined. In less than a month, he had already grasped the basics. However, he was rather cautious. He was afraid that he would make a mistake during the sacrificial refinement, so he repeatedly fumbled around a few more times. After confirming that there were no more mistakes, he retreated from the jade fragment in high spirits. He pinched his fingers and calculated. There was still nearly a year before he would open the cauldron. There was no one to disturb him, so he could use this time to study the 5 elements escape method. After the battle between Zhang Yan and Shen Baishuang, he was especially sad about the divine ability that sealed the heavens and the earth. But after calculating it, he realized that it was absolutely impossible for him to cultivate to such an extent in a short period of 5 years. A cultivator of the 3rd level of the nascent soul realm was not only profound in cultivation, but also profound in spiritual energy. It was not something he could compare with. Even if he had reached the 1st realm of the nascent soul realm and his spiritual energy was far greater than his peers, it was still not enough for him to use this technique. Fortunately, the 5 elements escape technique could not only be used to trap the enemy, but it could also be used to escape. Currently, he was already slightly proficient in the water element escape technique. After he managed to study it thoroughly, he would learn the earth element escape technique, and that should be enough. This time, Zhang Yan was completely focused and did not notice the passing of time. It was not until Taoist Su's voice came from outside the cave that he came out of the broken jade. He counted on his fingers and found that 10 months had passed. He said, "Deacon Su, come in." Taoist Su entered the cave and ignored the sudden appearance of Jing Yu. He bowed and said respectfully, "Zhenren Zhang, Uncle Master Qiao said that there are still 8 to 10 hours before he can start the sacrificial refining of the prohibition, so he ordered me to inform you first." Zhang Yan gave a light laugh and stood up. He walked out of the cave, and when he reached the edge of the cliff, he rode a gust of wind to the top of the pit. He looked down and saw that the pit was boiling. White fog and black smoke were constantly surging up. The surroundings were already like a sea of clouds, and it was a vast expanse of fog. Monastery head Xiao was sitting on the altar to the south. When he saw him, he called out, "Spiritual Master Zhang, quickly come up to the altar." Zhang Yan turned around, and with a gust of wind, he was already standing on the altar. Monastery head Xiao cupped his hands and politely said, "Spiritual Master Zhang, in half a day we can open the furnace. I, Daoren, will refine the seal. As for the earth fire baleful qi, I will have to ask Spiritual Master Qiao to help suppress it." Although Zhang Yan already knew how to refine the restriction, he also understood that the specifics were still up to Monastery head Qiao to manage. Thus, he nodded and returned the greeting. He said, "Whenever you need I to help, Monastery head Qiao only needs to let me know. There is no need to be polite." Monastery head Xiao pointed in front of him and smiled. Spiritual Master only needs to remember that the serpent pillar does not fall to the 9th layer of the inscription. Zhang Yan turned his head and saw that at the edge of the altar, there was a coiling serpent pillar. It was 3 feet thick and over 30 feet tall. The patterns on it were simple and serene. The appearance of the serpent dragon was sinister, and its head was biting the top of the pillar. Its body was surrounded by 18 layers of inscriptions. When the earth fire was ignited, it was extremely powerful. Unless one was skilled, it would be difficult for a cultivator to control the intensity of the fire. In order to see the strength of the fire, this pillar was erected. As the earth fire rose and fell, it could be moved up and down, and it could be seen at a glance. Monastery head Qiao explained a few more taboos, and with a point of his finger, the coiling serpent pillar sank down with a rumble. He then made a grabbing motion, and the 30 feet tall banner behind him suddenly shook. Countless golden talismans surged out and floated in the air. At a glance, there were over 10,000 of them. These items were condensed from magic power and spiritual qi. They still needed to be imbued with a pre-formed restriction spell before they could be refined into the cloud tower. Monastery head Xiao's expression was solemn as he continuously formed seals and imbued spells. After about 4 hours, there was a sudden boom. Earth fire continuously surged up from the pit, illuminating the inside of the pit with a bright red light. Multicolored light rushed into the sky, accompanied by a loud sound that shook the eardrums. It was already possible to see the lofty cloud tower slowly rising up from below. Monastery head Xiao waved the banner, and at this moment 81 stone dragon mouths extended from the sides of the pit, swallowing all of the fiend fire smoke so that it could not be obscured. At the same time, he shouted, "Spiritual Master Zhang, the heavenly furnace has been opened. Be careful of the earth fire." Zhang Yan did not hesitate. Using his magic power, a vigorous stellar energy descended and steadily suppressed the earth fire that was surging up. After the coiling serpent pillar had been opened, it had been rising steadily, but at the 9th layer, it stopped moving. Monastery head Qiao's expression relaxed slightly. He waved the banner, and the seals that had already been condensed flew toward the cloud tower. Without waiting for him to speak, Zhang Yan activated his magic power and urged the earth fire. Every time a talisman flew up to the cloud tower, it would cooperate with Monastery head Qiao to refine it. This seemed simple, but it required a tacit understanding between the two. If one did not understand restriction spells, they would definitely be thrown into disarray. The lofty cloud watchtower was an entire 1,500 meters in size, but the effort was concentrated on this small area. Refining it was simply like plucking off the feathers and peeling off the scales. Just 1 foot up and down required over 8,000 talismans. When arranging the talismans, there was a fixed order to the number of talismans, and it was the same for refining the fire. One had to follow closely and not make the slightest mistake, otherwise one would have to start all over again. Even a person that was skilled in formations and restrictions had to be careful. Monastery head Xiao was completely focused on refining. After sitting for over 10 days, he came back to his senses. He took some time to look at Zhang Yan sitting not far away. Seeing that he did not seem tired at all, he could not help but admire him. Suppressing the earth fire was not like controlling the banner. He could stop for a few hours at a time. Even if he felt tired, he could endure by swallowing some pills. This was purely relying on a mouthful of pure inner qi. It required him to continuously use magic power. If it were him, he would probably not be able to hold on for 3 days. According to his original plan, he and Zhang Yan would take turns, but he had not expected Zhang Yan's magic power to be so profound. While sighing, he also reminded him, "Spiritual Master Zhang, if you can't keep up, you have to say so. Don't try to be brave." Zhang Yan smiled slightly. "Don't worry, Monastery Head Xiao. I estimate that it should be able to last for another half a month." Monastery Head Xiao lowered his head in thought, then said seriously, "Then in 10 days I, Daoren, will take over. Spiritual Master, you will control the banner." Zhang Yan nodded in agreement. After all, they were using the earth fire to refine. If something unexpected happened, it would not be strange. It would be better to leave some strength to deal with it. Ever since the two of them had started refining the seal, Taoist Su had been silent. Now he suddenly said, "Spiritual Master Zhang, Martial Uncle, I might be able to help." Monastery Head Xiao looked over in surprise. "You?" Taoist Su said confidently, "Martial Uncle, refining the seal is not a difficult matter. I've been watching from the side for a month, and I already know all the changes. I'm confident I can do it." Monastery Head Xiao's eyes lit up. If it was anyone else who said this, he would have snorted disdainfully. However, he did not dare to underestimate this martial nephew. He knew that he was talented and had the ability. He pondered for a while. If Zhang Yan really did control the banner, he could free up his hands to suppress the earth fire together with Zhang Yan. That would be much easier. However, he could not make a decision by himself, so he looked at Zhang Yan and asked, "What does Spiritual Master Zhang think?" Zhang Yan sighed. Attendant Su has no one to guide him. After watching for less than a month, he has already understood the changes. "This is something that I would never be able to do." Monastery Head Xiao said that he is a heaven-bestowed talent, and it is not nonsense. "In my opinion, we can give it a try." Seeing that Zhang Yan was willing to give him a chance, Taoist Su cupped his fists and said solemnly, "Spiritual Master, don't worry. I will not make any mistakes." Monastery Head Xiao did not tarry. He immediately stood and gave up the main seat, allowing Taoist Su to take control of the banner. However, he was still not at ease. After watching from the side for a while, he saw that whether it was refining the seal or refining the seal, everything was done in an orderly manner. He was no different from a veteran, so he could not help but relax. He went to Zhang Yan's place to take over suppressing the earth fire. However, this Tao was truly not something he could handle. He could not last more than 2 or 3 days before he had no choice but to step back. It was still Zhang Yan who did it. Fortunately, Zhang Yan had medicinal pills on him. It only took him half a day to regulate his breathing and recover his vitality, so there were no mistakes. After 2 months, the three of them had already completed the sacrificial refinement of the southern corner. Although there were still the eastern, northern, and western corners, according to their current progress, they would at most need another half a year to completely refine the restriction. Chapter 524. Author's Note: Part 2 explosions rang out continuously within the earth fire heavenly cauldron. Star fire and molten star fire were continuously thrown out of the pit along with smoke. Those smoke clouds shot straight up into the sky, and after the sparks landed on the stone bricks, they soon turned into puddles of black residue. At first, when the three of them were refining the restriction, it was still rather smooth. But later on, for some unknown reason, the earth fire became violent and difficult to tame, causing the coiled dragon copper pillar to rise and fall from time to time. It was very unstable. Zhang Yan had no worries. Relying on his profound magic power and brilliant methods, he could always turn danger into safety. But Monastery Head Xiao was different. Normally, he rarely fought with others. Whenever he wanted to use force, he would pour all his magic power into it. Although the situation had improved with Zhang Yan's reminder, every time the earth fire was strong, he would return to his old habits in his anxiety. Often, he would not be able to hold on for even a day. Every time that happened, Zhang Yan would step forward to take over and try to maintain the situation. On this day, the three of them suddenly felt the entire heavenly cauldron trembling. Monastery Head Xiao jumped up and looked down into the pit. He suddenly laughed loudly and said, Enlighten Master Zhang, it's done, it's done. Hurry and work together with me to suppress the earth fire. After saying this, he raised his banner and waved it with all his might. Zhang Yan also roused his spirits and suddenly circulated his magic power. A vast astral wind suddenly swept out and suppressed the earth fire. Under the combined efforts of the two of them, the earth fire had no choice but to retreat into the pit. The lofty cloud tower transformed into a speck of spiritual light and flew up. Monastery head Xiao pointed at the sky and landed. Then he waved his sleeve and sent it to Zhang Yan. Stroking his beard that had long been dyed black, he said with a smile, "Spiritual Master Zhang, you can use your blood to refine it." After Zhang Yan received it, he placed the spiritual light in his palm and forced out a drop of essence blood to merge with it. After refining it slightly, he activated his magic power. A ray of light flew up and circled once before disappearing into the space between his eyebrows. Daoist Su was already exhausted. Seeing that he had finally succeeded, his spirits relaxed. With a putong sound, he lay on the ground facing the sky and passed out just like that. His cultivation was not as good as the two of them. If it wasn't for the pills that Zhang Yan gave him, he wouldn't have been able to hold on. Over the past half a year, he and Chancellor Qiao were covered in filth because they were completely focused on refining. Their hair was disheveled, and they looked battered and exhausted. There was only Zhang Yan. His robe was still spotless. This was not because he was deliberately maintaining it, but because he just happened to have the warm healing pill jade with him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become like this. Chancellor Qiao didn't seem to mind. His expression changed, and he came to Zhang Yan's side. "Sage Zhang, Daoren wants to ask for someone from you." Zhang Yan noticed that he kept glancing in Su Jing's direction from time to time. He smiled and asked, "Is it because of Deacon Su?" "That's right." Chancellor Qiao cupped his hands and said, "There are still 4 cloud watchtower restrictions in Doran's Fangchen courtyard, but he lacks manpower. Daoren originally planned to wait a few years and find a few people to help him. But now that we have Marshal Nephew Su, we only need to invite one more person. If Daoist Zhang is willing to lend him to me for 3 years, in the future, if Daoist Zhang needs to refine any restrictions in your Immortal's Cave, feel free to look for me." Daoist Su had just now volunteered to be Zhang Yan's disciple. He had also seen it. So if he wanted to take care of him, he would need Zhang Yan's permission. Zhang Yan originally didn't plan to take Daoist Su away immediately. This matter would have to wait until he returned from the sword competition of the 16 sects. Since Chancellor Qiao had asked, he did a favor at little cost. He smiled and said, "As long as Chancellor Qiao can convince him, I naturally have no objections." Chancellor Qiao was overjoyed. Since Su Jing had followed Zhang Yan's orders to pick up the formation, then it was most suitable for him to follow by his side. If he had brought it up, there was absolutely no reason for him to refuse. He was immediately filled with gratitude. Since this matter had been settled, Zhang Yan didn't plan to stay any longer. He still had to practice the 5 elements escape technique before the sword competition, so he bid farewell to Chancellor Qiao. Taking Jingyu with him, he stepped on a cloud and flew out of the heavenly furnace of earth fire. Once in the air, he determined the direction, shook his sleeves, and flew off in a rainbow. Not far from the gates of Qinsong School, he could already see the silhouette of Zhaoyu Mountain. But at this moment, he suddenly saw 2 rays of profound light flying rapidly under the clouds. The one in front was clearly a bit more brilliant, leaving the one behind farther and farther behind. The person at the back was clearly anxious and shouted. There were 2 disciples on duty outside the gates. When they heard the voice, they drove their flying boat over to inquire. But who knew that the person in front was extremely fierce? Without saying a word, he swept the profound light over. At the same time, he also took out a short sword and charged over with a desperate momentum. The cultivation of the 2 disciples on duty was similar to the person who had come. If they had tried to block him properly, he definitely wouldn't have been able to break through their combined efforts. But they had never imagined that someone would make a move against them. Even though they had the protection flag issued by the gates and managed to block him in a fluster, they didn't lose their lives. But they still suffered a loss and let him charge through. Zhang Yan saw that the situation was not right and let out a cold shout. With a leap, he rushed to the front. With just a shake of his sleeve, a strong wind swept down and easily swept up the person, pressing her against the cloud. With a sweep of his gaze, he saw that the person he had caught was a white-clothed young girl with a beautiful face. She looked extremely weak and delicate, and she seemed to have fainted after being swept by the gale earlier. At this moment, the person behind hurried over. When this person saw Zhang Yan, he couldn't help but exclaim, "Uncle Master Zhang?" Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and looked over. He had some impression of this person. He seemed to be Mo Tianhua's disciple. He asked, "Are you junior brother Mo's disciple?" In the past, he had escorted 12 disciples to the little demon cave to cultivate. This person was one of them. When he saw that Zhang Yan actually recognized him, he couldn't help but feel excited. He quickly bowed and said, "Yes, yes. Martial nephew Yu Hua greets Uncle Master Zhang." Zhang Yan waved his hand and pointed at the girl. He asked in a deep voice, "What's going on?" Yu Hua glanced at her, and his expression suddenly changed. A look of hatred appeared on his face. He gritted his teeth and said, "To be honest, Uncle Master, this girl is a disciple of the devil's doctrine who sneaked into my Qinsong school." Zhang Yan's expression froze. He became serious and said, "How did you know?" Yu Hua seemed to have some misgivings and hesitated. At this moment, the 2 disciples on duty drove the flying boat over. Zhang Yan glanced at them and waved his sleeve. "Go far away. Don't come over without my care." As guards, the 2 of them naturally recognized Zhang Yan. They saluted him with fearful expressions and left without saying a word. Looking at Yu Hua's expression, Zhang Yan guessed that there might be more to this matter. He sneered and said, "Since I've seen this, it's impossible for me not to ask about it. Don't think that you can get away with it. Just tell me the truth." Just now, even though Yu Hua had chased out of the mountain gate, he did not expose the girl's identity. It was not that he was unwilling, but he had been told by his fellow disciples that he could not tell others. However, facing a Yuanying Jinren, he really did not have much confidence. He could only vaguely explain, "This girl wanted to harm my master, but she did not succeed. I was only ordered to chase after her." It was unknown when the young girl had woken up, but when she saw that she had fallen beside Zhang Yan, she couldn't help but turn pale. She knew that she couldn't escape. Hearing Yu Hua's words, she couldn't help but mock. "It was clearly my teacher who coveted my beauty and drank my sect's secret medicine. If it wasn't for that little girl Mo Ing interrupting me, Tianhua would have long been mine." This girl was a wandering cultivator that Mo Tianhua had saved 40 years ago. Seeing that she was pitiful, he brought her back to the sect and took her in as a disciple. However, he did not formally acknowledge her as his master. Who knew that this girl was extraordinary? She had reached the mystic light realm in just 30 years. Mo Tianhua was very happy. Her talent was outstanding even among the many disciples in the sect, so he liked her very much. Recently, he even wanted to take her in as a concubine. However, he never would have thought that this girl was a disciple of the demonic sect and purposely stayed by his side for a reason. She had been hiding all these years and only attacked him after she had won his trust. She had almost been taken in by him. Zhang Yan could not help but shake his head. Mo Tianhua was a core formation cultivator and had countless disciples. In a small sect, he would be at least an elder, if not the sect master. However, he had been ambushed by a mystic light realm disciple of the demonic sect. If this matter was spread out, losing face would be a small matter, but it would be hard for him to raise his head in front of his peers in the future. He might even cause his peers to look down on him. No wonder Yu Hua was so secretive and did not want to say it directly. He probably knew the consequences. Zhang Yan looked at the girl and said, "You worked so hard to hide in my Qinsong school just to kill junior martial brother Mo? Do you have a deep grudge with him?" The girl obviously knew that she would not be able to keep her life, so she did not hide anything. She said, "I don't have any grudges with Mo Tianhua. I just happened to pick him. I am a disciple of the Blood Soul sect. If I can absorb the soul of a core formation cultivator of the Shen Gate, who in the same generation can be my match? Zhang Yan frowned and said, according to what I know, your blood-soul-sex cultivation method is very different from my Xian gates. How did you hide it from junior martial brother Emo? The girl said proudly, my cultivation is from the proper Xian gate and was obtained through many years of hard work. Otherwise, how could I hide it from old bastard Mo's eyes? I was only prepared to destroy this cultivation method after capturing old bastard Mo and returning to the sect. I will start from the beginning again. Hearing these words, Zhang Yan unconsciously looked at the girl a few more times. He felt a little admiration for her. Not to mention the boldness of this scheme, just the fact that she had crippled her decades of bitter cultivation without any hesitation was not something an ordinary person could do. If he hadn't coincidentally bumped into her today, she might have really escaped. Yu Huo was even more tongue-tied. Yu Huo was even more dumbfounded. After a moment of silence, he said angrily, which, I hurt my master. I will definitely grind your bones to ashes. The girl sneered again and said, since I have fallen into your hands, I have never thought of returning alive. I only wish for a quick death. However, Zhang Yan said indifferently, you will naturally die. However, before that, you need to tell me who is taking care of you in my sect. Chapter 525. P.S. Today is the third chapter. There won't be too many things to do in the mountain gate, but there are some things that must be explained. At most a few chapters, then I'll go to the sword competition. When Zhang Yan said this, he kept staring at the girl's eyes. Actually, he didn't know if this girl had accomplices in the mountain gate, but after the incident with the elder Kaidian, he knew that the cultivators of the demonic sect had the ability to steal souls. Therefore, he suspected that there was more than one person in the sect, so he tricked her. However, this girl's status and cultivation weren't high, so he didn't have any expectations. However, in that instant, the girl's eyes flashed with a hint of panic. Then she became extremely calm. This extremely subtle change was immediately captured by Zhang Yan. The girl suddenly laughed like a silver bell, and with a flirtatious look she said, this senior martial brother you in front of me usually takes good care of this little girl. Yu Huo's face instantly flushed red. This girl was beautiful, her temperament was also delicate, and her aptitude was also good. He also had a good impression of her. When he heard that his teacher wanted to take her as a concubine, he suffered for a long time because of this. Just now, he desperately chased after her, and it was also mixed with the pleasure of revenge. Zhang Yan thought that since he encountered this, he couldn't just leave, so he said to Yu Huo, take me to see your teacher. Yu Huo didn't dare to disobey, and could only ride on the light and lead the way. Just now he walked a few steps, Zhang Yan waved his sleeve, and a ray of water element true light flashed by, sweeping him in. Then he raised his hand and pointed, and a ray of sword light flew out. Before the girl could react, it had already entered her ear aperture. In a flash, her life force was harvested. After a while, a primordial spirit floated out from the body. Zhang Yan took out the Dan of Warmth Jade, and with a surge of mana, the primordial spirit entered. He put away the jade and said to Jingyu, who was still in a daze, go and take over her body. Jingyu didn't dare to disobey, and went into the girl's ear aperture. After a while, the girl stood up again, bowed, and said timidly, greetings, master. Zhang Yan looked at Yu Huo's expression and realized that he had imitated Yu Huo's movements to perfection. He nodded his head in satisfaction and waved his hand. Wherever the light flashed, Yu Huo rolled out again and walked one round in the water element true light. He still hadn't woken up. Zhang Yan spread his sleeve and rode on the clouds. He brought the two of them north. His speed was so fast that before Yu Huo could react, he heard a voice asking, is this the place? Yu Huo looked down and saw a long and narrow island lying on the water like a snake. The island was full of plants and was full of vitality. It was his cave abode, and he was pleasantly surprised. He didn't expect that he would return to this place in just a short while. He shouted, this is the place. Mo Tianhua was originally not here, but after he refined the medicine and condensed it into a pill, his master Elder Qi gave him this spiritual island, but after he moved here, he did not know why. Because of the commotion in the sky, it immediately attracted the attention of the disciples on the island. A ray of profound light shot up, and a lady with a graceful figure welcomed them from afar. At first, she was still on guard, but when she saw Zhang Yan, she sped up and greeted, "Mo Ying greets Uncle Master Zhang." Zhang Yan recognized that this was Mo Tianhua's niece, who entered the small demon cave to cultivate. She was the leader of the 12, so he said gently, "Apprentice niece, you may rise. Is your uncle here?" Mo Ying's expression dimmed, and said, "Uncle was poisoned by the magic medicine and is still unconscious." Zhang Yan nodded. The Mo clan didn't want the news to spread, or else they would have invited Elder Qi to cure the medicine. He heard that this elder was hot-tempered, and if he knew about this, even if Mo Tianhua woke up, it might not be a good thing. Even though the secret medicine was strong, the girl did not want to take Mo Tianhua's life. She was prepared to return to the sect before taking action, or else he would not be able to escape death. Yu Hua said, "Senior apprentice sister, I met Uncle Zhang on the way, and with his help, I was able to capture the demoness. It should not be difficult for her to save Master." Jing Yu, who was disguised as a girl, sneered, "Why should I save him? I will die anyway, so I might as well drag someone down with me." Mo Ying looked at her and sighed, "Mei Yi, I have treated you well in the past. Can you do me a favor and save Uncle?" The girl turned her head away and did not speak. Seeing that Jing Yu acted so well that even people who lived with her day and night could not see through her act, Zhang Yan was also amazed. However, he was sure that Mo Tianhua would be fine, or else it would be a waste of effort to capture him, so he said, "There is no rush. Who is in charge of your island now?" Mo Ying said softly, "Martial nephew has already sent someone to Glittering Jewel Grotto Heaven to ask Aunt to come back and make the decision." Mo Tianhua's Dao companion was Yang Ying, and she was an in-name disciple under Qinyu. However, her talent was not high, and she was still in the Xian light realm, so her master did not think much of her. When she heard that he wanted to take a concubine, she ran back in a fit of anger. If she was present, it would be difficult for Mei Yi to succeed. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "The fact that a disciple of the Devil's Doctrine has infiltrated the mountain gate is no longer your family's problem. It's impossible to keep this a secret. I have to report this to the sect leader. You should tell Elder Qi the details later, lest he blames you later." Mo Ying lowered her head and sighed, "Martial nephew understands." At this moment, a cloud suddenly appeared in the sky, whistling through the air. Everyone looked up and saw a handsome Taoist descending onto the island. He was wearing a cloud-like Taoist robe and had an ancient sword with dragon engravings on his back. Beside him stood a fair-skinned and charming woman. Mo Ying exclaimed, "Why did Auntie invite Grandmaster?" Zhang Yan smiled. This Yang Ying was really ruthless. She didn't hesitate at all and directly invited Mo Tianhua's master over. This time, Mo Tianhua was going to suffer. Elder Qi's face was grim, and as soon as he saw Zhang Yan, a look of surprise appeared on his face. He waved his hand, causing the astral cloud beneath his feet to slowly descend, whereupon all of the disciples on the island ran out and dropped to their knees. "Patriarch!" Elder Qi ignored them and walked over to Zhang Yan. He bowed and said, "Greetings, Reverend Zhang." Zhang Yan also bowed and said, "Greetings, Elder Qi." Elder Qi looked at Zhang Yan and asked, "Why is Reverend Zhang here?" Zhang Yan's lips moved, and he transmitted his voice over. Elder Qi's eyes flashed, and he stared at him for a while before sighing and saying, "I've made a fool of myself in front of Reverend Zhang." He suddenly turned around, and there was a cold gleam in his eyes. He looked at the disciples kneeling and shouted, "Mo Ying, where is that traitorous disciple?" Mo Ying was familiar with Elder Qi's temperament, and she could see that he was furious. She said anxiously, "Grandmaster, Uncle is still unconscious and can't come to greet you. I hope Grandmaster can forgive me." Elder Qi didn't move, and he reached out and grabbed the hilt of his sword. He said coldly, "It's good that he's unconscious. I'm afraid he won't have the face to see me." I'll kill him later, and everything will be over once and for all. Mo Ying was frightened by his stern words, and she begged bitterly. Elder Qi found her annoying and kicked her away, saying, "Whoever dares to stop me, I'll kill him as well." This time, no one dared to make a sound. Yang Ying was also stunned. She hadn't expected such a situation, and she had only brought Elder Qi here because she was angry. She had only hoped to teach her husband a lesson, but who would have thought that taking his life would be so serious? Elder Qi's gaze swept to the side, and when he saw Mei Yi standing there, a fierce expression instantly appeared on his face. He pointed his finger, and with a clang, the ancient sword on his back flew up and slashed across her neck, and her head fell to the ground. Zhang Yan seemed to be caught off guard by his sudden attack, and he was taken aback. He bent down and examined the body, then shook his head and frowned. "Elder Qi, this girl seems to have an accomplice hiding in the mountain. I even wanted to bring her to see Sect Master, but you've even killed her origin spirit. How are we going to investigate this matter?" Elder Qi was expressionless, and he said, "Reverend Zhang, this is our sect's matter, so there's no need for you to interfere. I'll explain myself in front of Sect Master." Zhang Yan was even more displeased, and he said, "Elder Qi, how can you do this? Besides, this isn't your sect's matter." Elder Qi said proudly, I've killed her. What are you going to do about it?" Zhang Yan's expression also darkened, and he sneered, "Elder Qi, do you dare to step aside and say something?" After saying that, he stomped his feet, and in an instant he rode on a strong cloud and flew into the sky. Elder Qi snorted, and he also followed. The two of them arrived above the extreme sky in a flash. This place was filled with strong winds, and other than Yuaning cultivators, no one could come here, so they weren't afraid of being spied on. Elder Qi's eyes were no longer filled with anger just now, and they were clear and calm. He asked calmly, "Reverend Zhang, why do you want me, Daoren, to do this? If it's just to lure out the devil sect's disciple hiding in our sect, isn't it better to keep this girl alive?" Just now, the two of them were doing this on purpose while Zhang Yan was talking to him via voice transmission. Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "If we really do this, this person won't have the intention to hide anymore, and he might even look for an opportunity to escape." Elder Qi Daoren said, "That's easy. If we capture this girl, her accomplice will definitely feel guilty, and we'll just have to be more vigilant for the next few days. We'll eventually be able to find some clues." Zhang Yan disagreed, and he said, "Who knows how many people go in and out of the Great Swallow Dragon Swamp every day, and there are even elders and disciples stationed outside right now. We can't make such a big fuss just for one person, and besides..." At this point, he suddenly changed the topic and said, "What if this person happens to be outside the sect?" Elder Qi couldn't help but be startled. He frowned and pondered for a moment, then nodded and said, "Reverend Zhang, are you saying that this person knows that Mei is about to make a move, and to prevent her from accidentally implicating him, he might hide outside the sect? This is somewhat possible. If I were that person, I would definitely arrange for spies to watch this girl's every move, and if I find out that she has been captured, he will immediately escape." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly, and he said, "Fortunately, this girl's original spirit is still in my hands, and our sect also has the soul-searching technique. If this person really exists, we can find out who he is. In my opinion, there's no need to rush to capture him, and we only need to keep a close eye on him. He might be useful in the future." Elder Qi deeply agreed and said, "Reverend Zhang is right. Now that the devil calamity has begun, we must be vigilant in everything. It's better for this person to be in the open than in the dark, but I'm very curious, who exactly is this person?" Chapter 526. Zhang Yan and Elder Qi chatted privately for a while longer and agreed to write letters to each other in the next few days. Zhang Yan then left. However, as soon as he got out of Qinsong School's mountain gate, he thought of something. He turned the astral wind around and flew towards the lower courtyard of Kangwu Mountain. Although the outside world was in chaos, The number of people who entered the mountain to seek Tao increased instead of decreasing. Most of them were the disciples of nobles and officials. They called themselves cultivators, but in fact, most of them came to seek refuge. After all, Qinsong School was a great Shenmen sect. Even though the devil tribulation had already begun, they could still feel at ease in the mountain gate. It was currently morning. In Kangwu Mountain, many disciples were meditating and chanting scriptures on the Thousand Rock. Suddenly, the clouds in the sky soared and the wind blew. They could vaguely see a handsome Taoist riding the wind and landing in the direction of Misty Cloud Peak. It immediately caused them to exclaim. A disciple called Chao Gu stood up excitedly and said, "Is that a divine ability to fly in the sky and travel through the earth? I wonder which senior brother in the courtyard has cultivated this technique. I must pay him a visit in the future. If he can pass it down, I'm willing to pay 10,000 taels of gold." In the early years of the Great Wei Dynasty, there were many rogue cultivators who worked for it. Although they relied on magical tools to fly, the nobles of the Wei Dynasty who didn't distinguish between the 5 grains couldn't tell the difference between them. However, in recent decades, because of the devil tribulation, the rogue cultivators were afraid that they would be captured by the disciples of the devil sect and have their primordial spirits sucked away. Therefore, they hid their traces. In addition, most of the Shenmen sects had sealed their mountains to avoid the tribulation. Therefore, the scene of cultivators flying in the sky was rarely seen. At this moment, a man who looked like a steward glanced at him and sneered, "I advise you to stop dreaming. The person coming is definitely the monastery master of the 3 views. Even my master might not be able to see him, let alone an ordinary person like you." Chao Gu was originally a relative of the Wei Dynasty, but he could only sulk after being looked down upon by this person. He didn't dare to talk back. In the 3 views, who didn't know that the stewards of the lower courtyard disciples couldn't be offended? Otherwise, they would be chased down the mountain in a few days. Many of the people here had been on the mountain for more than 10 years. They only knew that Ma Shouxiang was the abbot of the Shan Yuan Monastery, but they did not know that there was also the head of the Sanguan Monastery. One after another they came up to the steward to inquire about his background. The steward saw that everyone had surrounded him. They all had a fawning expression on their faces and couldn't help but feel proud. They cupped their hands in the direction of the mountain gate and said, "I'll let you know that this monastery head is a grand cultivator from our Qinsong School's upper academy." "He's actually an upper house cultivator?" the crowd exclaimed again. The lower house of Qinsong School might still collude with the mortal world, but the cultivators of the upper house could be said to be isolated from the mortal world. These disciples had only heard of it, but they had never seen it before. They only knew that after passing the Azure Parasol Mountain, they would arrive at a vast lake that was comparable to the East Sea. It was filled with celestial islands and spiritual lands, and the people who lived on them. They were all immortal cultivators who could fly in the sky and burrow into the ground. Good Abyss Monastery's monastery head, Ma Shouxiang, was cultivating in the monastery when he suddenly heard a child report that a streak of light came from the direction of the mountain gate and landed on the peak of Sweeping Cloud Peak. He guessed that it was monastery head Zhang Yan who had come, so he hurriedly changed his robes and put on a crown, tidied up his attire, and rushed to the back of the mountain. Wang Kaiwei had been following Zhang Yan's instructions for the past year. She was cultivating in the lower house when she sensed that her teacher had arrived, so she hurried over to greet him. When the 2 of them arrived at the back of the mountain, they saw Zhang Yan standing on the peak with his hands behind his back, looking at the churning sea of clouds beneath his feet. She hurriedly came over to greet him. Ma Shouxiang bowed and said, "Welcome, monastery head." Wang Kaiwei, on the other hand, knelt down and paid her respects. Zhang Yan turned around and said with a smile, "No need to be so courteous. Both of you may rise." Only then did the 2 of them rise. Zhang Yan said, "Monastery head Ma, I haven't been here for a long time. I didn't expect the lower house to be so prosperous." Ma Shouxiang shook his head and smiled bitterly. "Monastery head, you may not know. Rather than saying that these disciples are here to cultivate, it's better to say that they're here to avoid calamity. Recently, there have been even more of them." Zhang Yan sighed. Once the devil's calamity begins, the people will be plunged into misery and suffering. My Xuanmin's disciples can't even protect themselves, let alone the people of the mortal world. You don't have to chase them away, just let them be. Ma Shouxiang cupped his hands and said, Monastery head is benevolent. Mount Qingwu has 18 peaks and 36 streams. Even if there were 1,000 more people staying here, it wouldn't be a problem. Zhang Yan had no interest in secular affairs. After asking a few more questions, he turned to look at Wang Kaiwei and said, Kaiwei, my disciple, I ordered you to keep an eye on Han Zwiqing and investigate his background. Have you found out? Wang Kaiwei curtsied and said respectfully, Master, fortunately, I didn't disappoint you. I've already found out that this person is indeed from the Han clan. Decades ago, a defeated army caused chaos in the city, implicating the Han clan. Only his father, Han Shao, was left to hide in the mountains, but he was almost killed by the mountain bandits. Coincidentally, a fox demon passed by that day and saw that his father was handsome and a scholar, so she saved him. The two of them became husband and wife and even had a son and a daughter. At this point, her pretty face blushed slightly. She paused for a moment before continuing. That fox demon obtained half of an incomplete Tao scripture in her early years and was able to transform into a human. She knew that cultivation was not easy and longevity was hard to come by. Later on, she found out that Han Zhao's ancestor had an appointment with master, so she wanted the younger generation to enter the Qinsong school to be apprenticed to her master. However, her children had already cultivated that incomplete Tao technique and were too old. She was afraid that they wouldn't be accepted by the sect, so she sent Han Zwiqing, her youngest grandson, up the mountain to seek Tao. Zhang Yan couldn't help asking curiously, How do you know so clearly? Wang Kaiwei said, Disciple personally went to Han Zwiqing's grandfather and mother's residence and even saw that fox demon. The two of them were very respectful and only after asking in detail did I know the details. Zhang Yan had a look of praise in his eyes as he nodded. Kaiwei, you did a good job on this matter. Receiving praise from her master, Wang Kaiwei was also very happy. She lowered her head and said, Sharing master's worries is disciple's duty. Zhang Yan nodded. Go and call that Han Zwiqing over. Master wants to see him. Wang Kaiwei acknowledged the order and with a stomp of her slender feet, she rode a clear light down the mountain. In the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the light turned back and slowly descended to the ground. After the light faded, other than Wang Kaiwei, there was also a sturdy youth with white eyebrows standing beside her. Ma Shouxiang said in a low voice, Han Zwiqing, you've met the monastery head. Why aren't you coming up to greet him? The youth's expression froze. He had heard the steward's discussion from outside and knew that the person in front of him was a great cultivator from the upper house who had the ability to call the wind and summon the rain. He hurriedly knelt down and said, Disciple Han Zwiqing greets the monastery head. Although he grew up in the mountains, his grandfather, Han Shao, was a scholar. He was also literate and knew etiquette, so he didn't have that kind of rough habits. Zhang Yan carefully sized him up and saw that his foundation was excellent. His eyes unconsciously lit up. He had heard Ma Shouxiang say that this child had only used half a year to cultivate to the first level of essence condensation. Looking at him now, he had actually cultivated to the second level. His aptitude was obviously very extraordinary. He secretly nodded and decided to take this disciple in. He said, Han Zwiqing, over 90 years ago, your ancestor made an agreement with me to bring one of your clan into my sect to cultivate. Since you've come here, are you willing to take me as your master? When Han Zwiqing was young, he had heard his grandfather, Han Shao, mention that his ancestor had made an agreement with immortal Zhang. As long as the younger generation had the intention to cultivate, they could go and take him as their master. In reality, he was also half convinced, but his heart was very firm. He had come to Qinsong school with the hope of seeking the Tao. He had even reported Zhang Yan's name. But after waiting for over a year, there was still no movement. Just when he thought that this matter was probably false, he didn't think that Zhang Yan would actually come to take him as a disciple. He couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Ma Shouxiang saw that he was standing there in a daze and went forward to pat his shoulder. He amiably said, "Zhuqing, your opportunity has come. What are you standing there for? Why don't you quickly go and take him as your master?" Only then did Han Zhuqing come to his senses. He hurriedly went forward to Kowtow and said loudly, "Disciple Han Zhuqing greets teacher. I wish teacher a long life." Zhang Yan smiled and nodded. He said, "Since you and I have met for the first time, I will bestow you an instrument. You must remember to cultivate diligently." He sat still and only lightly waved his sleeve. A ray of light flew out and descended. Han Zhuqing subconsciously held the ray of light in his hand. When he opened his eyes, he saw that it was a simple and unadorned dagger about a foot long. There was a mysterious bird seal script on it. The dagger was extremely sharp, and when it was waved, it emitted a sound like the cry of a crane. He couldn't help but be excited. He bowed down and kowtowed again. He said, "Thank you, benefactor teacher, for bestowing this treasure." Zhang Yan said, "There are a few apprentice brothers and apprentice sisters above you. I won't say much to you. If you have any questions, you can ask your apprentice sister Wang. You should continue to cultivate in the lower house. Next year, you can go back to the sect with Kaiwei." Wang Kaiwei heard this and knew that teacher wanted her to stay behind to take care of this apprentice brother. She said, "Teacher, I understand. I will definitely take good care of little apprentice brother." Zhang Yan said a few more words before he waved his sleeve and flew into the sky, disappearing into the clouds. Han Zhuqing was very envious. Although his grandmother was a Yao cultivator, she was only a wandering cultivator. She didn't have this kind of ability to fly in the sky. Looking at the white clouds and the blue sky, his Dao heart became even more determined. Zhang Yan flew with the wind and returned to the front of clear nether heavenly lake in a flash. He waved his hand and opened the formation door. He took a step inside and entered the inner hall. He went straight to the jade couch and sat down. He waved his sleeve and a white silk scuttled out. After it circled around the hall, it landed on the ground and turned into a big-headed child. Jingyu looked around curiously. He felt that the cave was overflowing with spiritual energy, as if it wanted to fill up all the pores on his body. He was extremely lazy and comfortable. He couldn't help but take a few breaths. He was surprised and said, "Is this old master's cave? It seems that old master's position in the sect isn't low and his master is also very good. This young master's good days are coming." 1,500 years ago, he had also followed Zhenren He. He was very clear that to have such a blessed place as a cave, it was either the top 10 disciples of the sect or the masters who were amazing. He was secretly delighted and thought to himself, "The more the sect values old master, the more stable my life as a servant will be. I don't need to go out and fight for my life. With my lifespan, it won't be difficult for me to live for another 1,000 years." But if he knew that the reason why Zhang Yan brought him back was to take him to the sword competition to fight against the disciples of the devil sect, he would probably be paralyzed with fear on the spot. Zhang Yan didn't have the mood to pay attention to him for the time being. He closed his eyes and pondered. Because of the order to close the door for 5 years, he couldn't go to the next year's competition. In the remaining few years, he could focus on studying the 5 elements escape technique. Just as he was thinking, he suddenly felt something on the opposite stone platform suddenly vibrate. In an instant, the spiritual energy in the cave seemed to be sucked in by a whale, gathering towards it. Chapter 527. Zhang Yan noticed that there was a change in the spiritual vigor in the cave residence. He took a look and found that the divine beast egg was moving. Because this thing was huge, it was comparable to a small hill. Since he brought it back to the cave residence, it had been placed on the stone platform outside. It was nourished by the spiritual energy in the cave day and night. If people who didn't know the details came here, they might think that it was a decoration. With the continuous injection of spiritual breath, the original rough stone appearance on the egg gradually shed, revealing a smooth appearance. There were dark spots on the outer shell. The waves were shining, and there was water vapor rising. The mist was misty, like the white clouds coming out of the mountain, filling the cave residence in an instant. After a full 2 hours, the phenomenon gradually stopped, and the object returned to its inconspicuous appearance of a mountain rock. Zhang Yan's heart moved. He summoned the mirror spirit, pointed and asked, "Did this thing have such a change before?" The mirror spirit hurriedly said, "Master, since you left for a year, this egg would have such a strange movement every noon and noon to swallow spiritual energy. Other than that, it didn't do any harm. Because I don't know what master means, I just let it be." Zhang Yan felt that something was wrong. He ran his power a little, but found that when he moved the spiritual vigor, he felt a little sluggish, not as comfortable as in the past. Only now did he realize that although only 2 hours had passed, the amount of spiritual energy that had been sucked away by the egg was not small. If it wasn't for the fact that his clear nether heavenly lake was a paradise, it was possible that it would have been sucked dry. That was not all. What was more strange was that after such a movement, there was a trace of coldness in the cave residence. Even he felt that the coldness had penetrated into his marrow and seeped into his heart and lungs. He ran his mystic art for a moment to expel this uncomfortable feeling. After carefully sensing for a moment, he found that this was the mystical chi from the depths of the heavenly lake. It should have been absorbed by this egg, and there was still some remaining here. He didn't think too much about it and casually sent a stream of clear chi over, wanting to disperse it. But the moment his magic power came into contact with the water vapor, he suddenly felt all the acupoints in his body throb and tremble. His brows couldn't help but twitch as he revealed a look of surprise. He silently observed and found that the 365 drops of serene heavy water were actually leaping about, as if they were in a hurry to come out. This heavy water was usually hidden in his aperture and nurtured. It had always been well behaved and never moved unless he summoned it. However, he did not know why it was acting up today. It was very strange, rumbling and clamoring. After thinking for a while, he felt that it wasn't appropriate to suppress it, so he withdrew his magic power and let go of the reins. As soon as the restraints were broken, all of the heavy water impatiently leaped out and flew into the air above the hall. It circled around like a spinning top, and the hall was filled with rumbling thunder. His eardrums vibrated as if he was starving and thirsty as he ceaselessly sucked in the profound energy, and in next to no time, he swallowed it completely. One of the droplets even began to change. Not only did it grow larger as it spun, but its color also gradually changed. The water was originally as black as ink. Now, it was even more indescribably cryptic and gloomy, deep and indescribable. When the light energy touched it, it was as if it was about to sink in. Zhang Yan saw that it was no longer struggling. He let out a clear shout and absorbed all the serene heavy water back into his aperture acupoints. After grinding it for a short moment, he concentrated his mind and circulated the strange heavy water to the tip of his finger. When he looked at it with rapt attention, he saw that although this ball of heavy water was only the size of an infant's fist, he was able to feel that it contained a peerlessly powerful force. The water within it rippled and rose and fell indeterminately, and it revealed an indescribably profound concept. His heart moved slightly and he thought to himself, could this be the Xianming heavy water? If the serene heavy water was further improved, it would be the Xianming heavy water. According to the Lan Yun secret book, the power of this water was far above the serene heavy water. This incantation was the first superior incantation that he had cultivated, but after he had cultivated the Taishan 5 elements true light, he did not care much about it. Although when he was condensing his mana and true seal, he had once divided a portion of the essence into it, but when he was facing an enemy, the serene heavy water was only used as a means of restraint, and he had never really used this incantation as a powerful method. He did not expect that there would be such a change today, and it was out of his expectations. It must be said that this was a rare opportunity. If it was someone else, he did not know how happy they would be. But the most important thing for him now was to master the 5 elements escape magic and have another ability to protect his life. This matter could not be delayed, so he could only put this incantation aside for the time being. Zhang Yan knew in his heart that he'd easily refined a ball of netherism heavy water earlier, but that was only because of a fortuitous encounter. If he were to do it once more, it would absolutely not be so easy. If he wanted to transform all 365 drops of serene in heavy water into Xianming heavy water, he was afraid that it would take more than a few years of effort. Then the loss would outweigh the gain. He weighed the pros and cons in his heart. Even though this divine beast's egg was extraordinary, he didn't know how long it would take for it to hatch. If he were to leave it in the hall, then not only would it be detrimental to its nourishment, it might even affect his cultivation, so he could only change places. After thinking about it, he said to the mirror spirit, "Zhang Jing, you move this thing down. If there are any changes, report to me." The mirror spirit calmly responded. She gently stroked her palm and turned the array door. In the blink of an eye, the egg was moved to another place. Zhang Yan called Mountain River Boy out from his mind and told him, "Zhang Ju, pay attention to that thing. Try to collect the remaining qi every day. Don't leave anything behind." Mountain River Boy bowed and said, "Yes, master." After Zhang Yan finished explaining, he saw that Jing Yu was still looking at him eagerly, as if waiting for his arrangement. He thought for a moment, took out a jade box and said, "Go in and wait." Jing Yu suddenly showed a bitter face, but he did not dare to disobey. He muttered, turned into a white light, and went into the jade box. Zhang Yan smiled and said to him, "You can restrain yourself for 1,500 years. Why do you care about a few years? When I come out, I will let you out. I still need you." After that, he closed the jade box and threw it into the bag. At this time, the cave house was quiet. He no longer got distracted. He closed his eyes, and the essentials of the 5 elements escape method emerged in his mind one by one and flowed in front of his eyes. In order to use this technique, one must first cultivate a breath of 5 elements qi. But he had the great mystery 5 elements zhengong, so he could overcome this hurdle, and was naturally superior to others. Actually, the various Taoist techniques of the various Taoist sects all required matching techniques to be cultivated together. Only then would they be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. If they had to cultivate other techniques, not only would it take a long time, they might not even be able to cultivate it to a profound level. From this point of view, the 5 elements escape method was innately compatible with Zhang Yan's own cultivation method, as if it was tailor-made for him. It was a rare shortcut. Zhang Yan originally thought that even if there were difficulties, he would only need to put some effort into it, and it would be easy to pass. However, when he truly practiced this divine ability, he realized that the complicated changes and profoundness within it had far exceeded his imagination. No wonder this magical power was ranked 3rd among the 12 magical powers, and there were very few people who chose it. If one wanted to learn this method, it would take more than 100 years of practice. Even Qi Yuntian practiced the minor universe shifting escape method that evolved from the 5 elements escape method. It was obvious how difficult this technique was to practice. What was most troublesome was that there was only the 5 elements fusion method. Because of this, the difficulty was multiplied. According to the usual method, after a cultivator learned it, he could only slowly grind it down. After a few decades, he might be able to learn something. However, Zhang Yan thought it was inappropriate. If he continued to practice like this, not only would he waste his time, he couldn't count on it at the critical moment. It was too different from what he had expected. Especially now that the Devil's Trial had begun and he had to go to the sword competition gathering, he didn't have the time to waste on this. Therefore, he came up with an idea, which was to use the 9 primordial spiritual treasures mystic true scripture to deduce the 5 elements escape method. This method was one of the 5 techniques and 3 scriptures in the sect, and it came from the same source as the 5 elements escape method. He took the right step. In fact, this was not an easy thing to do. If it was someone else, it would take them 30 or 40 years. Even if they knew that they could do it, they would probably give up as soon as they thought of it. They wouldn't waste their energy on it. However, Zhang Yan had the broken jade in his hand, so he didn't have to worry about this. After he became a nascent soul, not only did he deduce the water escape method, but he also practiced it until now so he could use it. What he needed to do next was to deduce the Earth escape method. After going through the entire method again, he took a light breath and sat down. He reached out to hold the broken jade, closed his eyes, and immersed his mind into it. Since he achieved yuaning, one day in the broken jade was equivalent to more than 80 days in the outside world. He was so immersed in it that he didn't notice the passage of time outside. This time, when he woke up from the meditation, he looked at the Zyu plate in the stone room and found that a year had passed. Calculating the time, it should be the time of the sect's major competition. However, the sect master had ordered him to not know anything about the sect, so it was not appropriate for him to join in the fun. Moreover, he was now Jinren Yuaning, and he was ranked 4th among the top 10 disciples. After he killed Elder Hu with one sword, his reputation was even more famous. Even if he didn't show up in the major competition, no one dared to question his strength. He pondered for a moment and cast a spell into the small pot mirror. After a while, Zhang Jing came out, bowed and said, "Master, what can I do for you?" Zhang Yan, when I was in seclusion, was there any letter from the sect? The mirror spirit said, there was one letter, but it was not signed. I don't know who sent it. Master, do you want to have a look? Zhang Yan guessed that it should be the letter sent by Elder Qi. He might be avoiding something, so he didn't write his name. He said, "Let me have a look." The mirror spirit stroked her sleeves, and there was a letter in her hand. She stepped forward and handed it to him respectfully. Zhang Yan took it and opened it to take a few glances. In his heart, he already understood. Without batting an eyelid, he put it down. After thinking for a while, he said, "Write a letter to the residents of the lower courtyard and inform Kai Wei that she and Zhuo Cheng can return to our mountain gate." Chapter 528. P.S. There is one more section at night. The lower house of Qinsong School was divided into 3 temples. The Virtuous Temple and the Virtuous Temple were for men. Only the Peaceful Temple was for women. Wang Kaiwei had been living here for the past 2 years. Ever since the passing of the 2 temple heads, the lower house had been dominated by Ma Shouxiang. Zhang Yan had sent her here in name to take care of Han Zhuoqing, but in reality, it was to take care of the lower house on behalf of her master. Wang Caiwei's cultivation had become more profound by the day. Although she had not surpassed her sister Wang Kading, she had the shady massacre blade. Even if a strong enemy came, she would not be afraid. All the disciples in the temple, regardless of whether they came from a master or a disciple family, knew that she was Zhang Yan's disciple and a true disciple of the Yudsong sect, so they were very respectful to her and didn't dare to offend her. Because of her master's orders, she was very diligent. Every day, besides supervising Han Zhuoqing's cultivation, she taught him how to deduce the erosion symbols. Although Han Zhuoqing's cultivation progressed quickly, he had no talent in the erosion symbols. Every time he saw the words, he felt a headache coming on. Wang Kaiwei did not care. She only knew that in order to learn the sect's cultivation method, he had to be proficient in the erosion symbols. This made Han Zhuoqing miserable. One day, Han Zhuoqing sighed at the erosion symbols in front of him. His face was bitter and his scalp was about to break. Wang Kaiwei sternly said, "Little junior brother, don't think you can get away with it. When senior sister Kai Ting and I entered the sect, Master didn't pass down any techniques to us first. Instead, he ordered us to study the eroding runes first. Not only us, but even senior sister was ordered to study it. So don't think you can get away with it. Even if I don't teach you, you will still have to pass this test in front of Master." Han Zhuoqing was helpless, but he did not take it seriously. He said, "Senior sister is trying to scare me again. It seems that the senior brothers in the lower house do not know as much about the erosion symbols as I do. It won't necessarily drag down my cultivation. Why is senior martial sister so serious?" In the evening, Han Zhuoqing left the peaceful temple dejectedly and returned to his cave residence. Thinking about how he would have to learn the useless erosion symbols tomorrow, he became even more annoyed. He thought about it and said, "I've been cultivating since I came up the mountain. I've never been to the city at the foot of the mountain, so I might as well take a look." There was a large town several dozen kilometers below the Azure Parasol Mountain. In recent years, there had been a lot of nobles coming and going. There were no bandits or evildoers, so it was even more bustling and prosperous, not inferior to a state city. As soon as he had this thought, his heart itched unbearably. He was afraid that Wang Kaiwei would find him, so he did not return home and went down the mountain. He thought, I'm going to play for a few days. Shiji has received Shifu's order to take care of me. If she can't find it, she must be anxious. When I come back and get scared, she won't force me to read that stupid talisman anymore. If I come back, she won. I'll be. She will cultivation. Seeing a flying letter enter the hall, she stretched out her hand and gently caught it. She opened it and saw that it was a flying letter from Bright Nether Lake, ordering her to take Hans Wiching back to the mountain gate. Knowing that she could return to her cave abode, she was very happy. She had been in the lower house for 2 years. But it wasn't as good as when she was in the bright dark lake. She couldn't advance as fast as before, but it wasn't without its benefits. Her cultivation slowed down, and she could consolidate what she had learned. In the long run, the advantages outweighed the disadvantages. She looked at the sky and saw that it was getting brighter. She tidied up her clothes and left the peaceful temple to find Hans Wiching. Because she felt that flying was too much of an eyesore, she walked like a carriage, and not long after, she arrived at the Good Abyss Monastery. However, when she asked around, the disciples in the monastery all said that they had not seen Hans Wiching today. She was surprised and did not care about anything else. She rode the light and flew around the lower courtyard in a flash, but still did not find him. She felt slightly uneasy and found a few more disciples to ask around, guessing that he had gone down the mountain to play. She sighed softly, then rode the dark light and flew down the mountain in a streak of light. In the town at the bottom of the mountain, Helian Wei, a disciple of Muching's sect, was sitting in a 2-story restaurant. He looked at the people on the street with interest. Sitting in front of him was a young man in his 20s. He leaned forward and said, "Grandmaster, I've heard that Zhang Yan didn't show up at the Qinsong School's competition. Huo Zhong and Luo going to the sword competition is a foregone conclusion." He Lianwei couldn't help but find it funny when he saw his nervous appearance. He said, "You don't have to be like this. If the Qinsong sect had their eyes on you, they wouldn't have allowed you and me to chat freely here. This kind of common and commonplace is the safest. Those disciples of the Taoist sect won't be able to track us all the way here. Moreover, you're only seeking the Tao in the lower house. You can't even be considered a disciple." The disciple smiled awkwardly and said, "You're right, Martial Granduncle." He Lianwei looked at him and said carelessly, "But you did well." After the competition of the 16 sects, you can go back to your sect to cultivate. The disciple was overjoyed. Although he was ordered to join Qinsong School, Muching's sect didn't use any means to control him. So it wasn't that he didn't want to cut ties with the demon sect. But later on, he quickly discovered that if he wasn't an outstanding disciple with outstanding aptitude, no one would even look at him, nor would they pass on any profound techniques. Entering the upper house of the Yudsong sect was an extravagant hope, so he could only stay obediently and hope that he could make some contributions to the sect. In the future, if he could learn some Taoist techniques, and then go to the rich and powerful places in the world, then his life would not be in vain. He was holding a cup of wine and thinking about beautiful things when he suddenly saw a figure. He couldn't help but cry out in surprise. He leaned on the table and took a look. He thought to himself, "Hans Wiching? Why is he here? It's best if I don't run into him." He Lianwei didn't turn around. A strange light appeared in his eyes, and the appearance of the person appeared in his mind. He asked, "This person seems to be a cultivator. Is he from the same sect as you?" The disciple thought for a moment and said, "I don't have such good luck. I heard that this person is a disciple of Zhang Yan and will enter the upper house in a few days." He Lianwei's eyes flashed and he said in a low voice, "You're saying he's Zhang Yan's disciple? Is that true?" The disciple hurriedly said, "This disciple doesn't dare to speak nonsense. This person is a disciple that Zhang Yan personally came to the lower house a year ago. It has spread throughout the lower house. Originally, while it was not a secret that Zhang Yan had taken a disciple, Ma Shouxiang and Wang Kaiwei would not speak of it. However, Han Zhuqing was only 16 years old. Youths loved to show off and could not help but spread it everywhere. There were more and more people who came to curry favor with him. As a result, everyone in the lower house knew of it. A hint of a smile gradually appeared on He Lianwei's face. He said, "Go greet him in a moment and then try to lure him to the mountains outside of the village. Afterwards, you can return to the mountain." The disciple was very clever and immediately realized He Lianwei's intentions. He did not dare to ask too much and immediately stood up. He clasped his hands and came down from the restaurant. He thought to himself, "Does Martial Granduncle want to capture this Han Zhuqing? But this person has not opened his meridians. There are as many people like this in the Qinsong school. Zhang Yan might not feel bad about losing this disciple. What use is there in taking him?" Although he was puzzled, he still walked in the direction of Han Zhuqing after coming down. When he got closer, he acted as if he had accidentally bumped into Han Zhuqing. He said with surprise and joy, "Isn't this senior martial brother Han?" Han Zhuqing had never been to the mortal city. Even when he came to the Qinsong school to be apprenticed, he would only take the small, desolate paths. Now that he had come to this village, he felt that everything on the streets was incomparably novel. Suddenly hearing someone call his name, he turned his head and recognized a familiar face. He could not help but ask curiously, "So it's Junior Martial Brother Wu. Why are you here?" Junior Martial Brother Wu scratched his head and said, "I won't hide it from Senior Martial Brother. A few days ago, my wife sent me a letter asking me to bring back some fragrant boxes and cosmetics." Han Zhuqing said in shock, "Junior Martial Brother Wu, you're already married?" Junior Martial Brother Wu revealed an embarrassed expression and said, "I've let Senior Martial Brother see a joke. I was originally a mountain person from the countryside. That was a marriage arranged by my family a long time ago." Han Zhuqing was puzzled. "Then why did you come up the mountain to cultivate?" Junior Martial Brother Wu sighed and said, "It's a chaotic world now. Learning some Dao techniques to protect myself will also help me settle down when I go back." After saying this, he bowed deeply and said, "I hope Senior Martial Brother will not tell others. If my fellow disciples find out, they will definitely laugh at me. I can't stay on the mountain for long." Han Zhuqing patted his chest and said, "Junior Martial Brother, don't worry. I'm not someone who speaks carelessly. I guarantee that other than you and me, no one else will know about this." Junior Martial Brother Wu secretly laughed and thought to himself, "I'd be a fool if I trusted this mouth of yours." He was good at reading people's minds. He knew that if a person told his secrets to others, that person would feel that they were a level higher than him. They would think that they had seen through him and would be less guarded. On the surface, he put on a grateful expression and pulled Han Zhuqing's sleeve. He said enthusiastically, "It's rare for Senior Martial Brother to come down the mountain. There's a good place to have fun 80 li from here. Let me be the host and bring Senior Martial Brother there to have a good time." When Han Zhuqing heard that he was going out of town, he immediately hesitated. He felt that something was wrong and said, 80 li? I don't know how to fly yet. I'm afraid that I'll only be able to return tomorrow. I won't go. It's better to just stroll around here." Junior Martial Brother Wu sighed and said very sincerely, "Senior Martial Brother is not like Junior Martial Brother. You've seen much of the world and are spiritual Master Zhang's brilliant disciple. This town is filled with common things. How can they enter Senior Martial Brother's eyes? Senior Martial Brother, don't worry. I guarantee that place will satisfy you." Being flattered like this, Han Zhuqing was embarrassed to say that he didn't know much, so he hesitantly agreed. Although He Lianwei was in the restaurant, he was a devil sect cultivator. He was separated by a street, but he could still hear the conversation between the two clearly. The disciple with the surname Wu and Han Zhuqing obviously didn't have much of a relationship in the past, but he managed to gain Han Zhuqing's trust with just a few words. He felt that this person was a capable person. If this matter was settled, He Lianwei didn't mind giving Han Zhuqing a secret technique or two. Seeing that the two of them had been sitting outside the town for 2 hours, his body suddenly swayed and disappeared from his seat. When he reappeared, he was already stepping on smoke and appeared in the clouds. A bright light shot out from his eyes. After glancing around, he smiled strangely and turned into a rolling black cloud, flying toward the south. Not long after he left, a clear, profound light flew over from the azure parasol mountain. It didn't land but circled above the small town and also flew toward the south. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.